G'day, May 40 here. So standing by waiting for Iran to attack Israel. I have an impulse just wants to look at Twitter every minute to try to find out what's going on in the Middle East. So latest word is that Iran will probably attack tomorrow. I just heard a perspective that I hadn't thought of or considered before that explains why the Biden administration is particularly reluctant to allow Israel to fight back against Hezbollah and Iran. So Iran funded and prepared Hamas for its October 7 massacre of Israelis. It has funded and prepared Hezbollah to launch thousands of missiles into northern Israel, which has forced about 80,000 Israelis to move away from the north of the country. So Iran has effectively shrunk the effective living space of Israel. And so now that Israel has assassinated two key leaders in the Hezbollah and Hamas ranks that are supported by Iran, what the heck happens next? How should we understand Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's foreign policy? Here's a perspective from Michael Doran, who used to serve in the George W. Bush administration.
We would find out that, you remember back in 2020 when Barack Obama called up Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar and said, please get out of the Democratic primaries because the non-Bernie Sanders vote is being divided among all of you. And I've decided, I've anointed Joe Biden as the non-Sanders leader of the party. And so we will consolidate all the vote behind Biden. So they all dutifully got out of the race, and then Biden became the nominee. So then later on, Bernie Sanders came in behind Biden, and I think, I can't prove this, but I think part of the deal with the progressives when they came to this, consolidated the party in this way, was that the Biden administration would agree to no new carbon energy projects. And one of the things that they did, this actually leaked out, they sent a cable to all posts all around the globe that we will not, and by the way, Amos Hochstein happens to be the point man on all of this. We will not support any carbon energy initiatives anywhere in the world, not on American shores and not globally. So if there's no new carbon energy proposals that the U.S. is directly backing, then it needs Venezuelan oil, it needs Iranian oil, and so on to keep the prices down. So their energy policy is bound up in their Iran policy. Their Iran nukes policy, this appeasement policy is bound up in that. And of course, the Department of Defense is busy with a war in Ukraine, worried about a war in Taiwan. The last thing it wants is a major buildup, a U.S. buildup in the Middle East. And so they think the easiest way to get to a quiet life in the Middle East is to shut down Israel's war in Gaza rather than to escalate against Iran.
Yeah, it's interesting how the Green New Deal approach is also working to Iran's advantage. Let me just drill down for a moment on the nuclear issue. I remember, because I wrote about it at the time, a week before October 7th, on a Friday afternoon news dump, the Department of Defense said that Iran was only less than 2 weeks away from having enough material to assemble a bomb. Recently, Secretary of State Blinken more or less repeated that. Is it now basically American policy that Iran is a nuclear threshold power, if nothing else at the very least, and that is something that the United States tolerates or even tacitly approves of?
I think basically yes. That's the. I don't know that would be the policy of the Trump administration, but rolling any of this back is going to be very difficult. And but clearly it was always obvious to me. Again, this is not something I could prove, but it was always obvious to me that when you listen to him and his senior officials talk, I'm talking about President Obama, that President Obama asked himself a question, and the question was, is it worse for Iran to go nuclear, to become a nuclear power, or is it worse for the United States to go to war, to carry out serious military action against Iran to prevent it from becoming a nuclear power? And he decided that the worst thing was for there to be American military action. And that basically green-lighted it set us on the path to where we are now.
Okay, so one of the most talked about stories on Twitter right now is that Doug Emhoff has admitted an affair with his nanny. he got pregnant and she did not carry through with the baby. I'm not sure if that means she put her up for adoption. It's not all clear. When Kamala Harris was being vetted to be vice president of the United States, the Harris campaign disclosed this to Joe Biden's campaign that Doug Emhoff had an affair. It's curious then that the Harris campaign has put Doug Emhoff out there so publicly, making the case for abortion. Why would you put a guy like this in who's damaged goods out there to make the case for Jewish values and for abortion? So if Doug Emhoff had simply lived his life as a private citizen rather than as a political activist, his affair would receive far less scrutiny. But Kamala Harris, knowing all about her husband's affair with his first wife, right, she has chosen to put abortion at the center of her political campaign, that she's raising the salience of this story. And I know that Jews are not thrilled that Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, has been out there publicly talking up Jewish values for years. So just empirically, in my experience, that the Jews who most practice Judaism, the Orthodox, are the least likely to talk about Jewish values because we understand Jewish obligations, in particular legal terms, and there's much less discussion of these amorphous Jewish values categories. The Jews least likely to practice any Judaism are the most likely to talk to the world about Jewish values. I noticed when I wrote a book on Hollywood that the people who most likely to describe their Jewish upbringing as very religious were almost never Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews don't tend to talk about religion. And those who grew up with the most discipline and with the most religious commitments in Jewish life are the least likely to talk about these obligations in religious terms. They're understood more in terms of something called Yiddishkeit, which is Jewish tradition. So Steve Saylor has an important blog post. Why in 2014 was the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, a reasonably good-looking 50-year-old guy who was making about $1 million a year as a Century City lawyer, why was he available to marry his 50-year-old Kamala Harris? Right? They were born 7 days apart in October 1964. Turns out this was because Doug screwed up his first marriage to the mother of his 2 kids by knocking up his kid's school teacher, whom the Emhoffs also occasionally hired as a nanny. Now, why is this relevant? Well, Kamala Harris has chosen to run her campaign on the issue of abortion. Now, the Daily Mail emphasizes the pregnancy, but the New York Times ignores that angle, right? Because the pregnancy raises too many interesting questions for the New York Times to tolerate. Pregnancies are interesting. The New York Times, 10 million paying subscribers, don't read the New York Times because it's interesting. They read the Times because it bores them into assuming that their worldview is unquestionable. Now, much of the New York Times approach to news stories that raise uncomfortable questions for liberals and for Democrats is boring, but much of the coverage outside of that tends to be well-written and not boring. Steve Saylor says, my impression is the median American voter finds abortion grotesque and would like the government to derogate other people being so sloppy as to be getting abortions. On the other hand, the median voter would, now that they think about it, like abortion to be legal, just in case, God forbid, their daughter happens to be impregnated by that loser boyfriend of hers. Now, the legalization of abortion's impact on male behavior is not a much discussed question, and this question might be brought to the surface in talking about the second gentleman's conundrum. I don't know what happened to the second gentleman's unborn child, but it's obviously an intriguing question. So let's say that the reason Doug Emhoff was available to marry Kamala Harris was because his kid's school teacher and nanny, whom he impregnated, had an abortion. So therefore, he wasn't under social pressure to marry her, right? If he was just a prominent attorney, he would be under more social pressure if he was in a traditional community to marry her. Or did his nanny, mistress, school teacher give up the baby for adoption? Did he pony up the money for her to raise the baby as a single mother? Did he not put up the money? Right? These are all relevant questions to the abortion policy question that Kamala Harris is raising. Let's get a brief overview of the news here from Howard Kurtz.
Matchup to its essence, a former president against a vice president who replaced the incumbent president, it might look like this.
You know who's playing weird? She's playing weird. She's a weird person.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
It's the weirdness Olympics, you might say. In an interview with Fox's Laura Ingraham, Donald Trump was asked how world leaders would treat Kamala Harris if she wins the election.
She'll be like a play toy. They look at her and they say, we can't believe we got so lucky. They're going to walk all over her. And I don't want to say as to why, but a lot of people understand it.
Harris roused a big crowd in Atlanta over Trump's mixed signals on debating her.
So I think Donald Trump there is hinting about she's probably more vulnerable to being bullied because she's so insecure, right? She got a start in politics as Willie Brown's mistress, right? She's great when she's scripted, right? She can be great. She can rise to the occasion when she's scripted, but foreign negotiations are not always so scripted, and she's less likely to rise to the occasion.
Because as the saying goes, if you got something to say it to my face.
But most of the mainstream media are showing virtually no interest in the extremely liberal things that Harris has said in the past, in stark contrast to their voracious appetite for any controversial utterance by J.D. Vance, the only scrutiny coming on Fox and from some conservatives.
So apparently the Kamala Harris campaign is anonymously leaking stuff to the New York Times because, remember, we've been talking about how when she was running for president in 2019, 2020, she said some crazy stuff. It's all on tape. She's not actually for that stuff anymore.
I think a lot of people want to see the media doing its job. Let's ask serious questions about Kamala Harris's record. Let's ask about the quite stridently left-wing positions she was taking as recently as 2020.
Shouldn't that be part of the media's responsibility? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz.
Thanks, Howard. Let's fast forward.
The group's co-chair resigned partly because of the invitation. April Ryan, who shared a mutual disdain with Trump, said bringing him in was unacceptable because he's an authoritarian. And the panel, which included Fox's Harris Faulkner, began with this question, more of a denunciation, really, by ABC's Rachel Scott.
You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama.
Okay, if Donald Trump is an authoritarian, what were the preferred liberal left policy options during COVID of shutdowns? I am not a lawyer, referring to the question in the chat. All right. For any emergency in every functioning democracy, there are virtually unlimited emergency powers that are available. Real emergency, putative emergency. A government just has to invoke the threat of an emergency to take away any right, such as we saw during COVID, the initial periods, the lockdowns, your right to freedom of assembly, your right to freedom of movement, right, your right to petition the government in the form of a rally were all taken away. So in an emergency, any government can take away your rights. It was the left, generally speaking, who wanted much stricter lockdowns and more revocation temporarily of rights in the face of this COVID emergency. And generally speaking, by a ratio of about 2 to 1, I think the left was right to institute lockdowns. Not every lockdown, right? Not every aspect of the lockdown was correct policy, but generally speaking, I think a national response to a health emergency like COVID, lockdowns in the early stages, encouraging people to get vaccinated. I think, generally speaking, by a ratio of about 2 to 1, the left was more right than the right with regard to COVID. Now, at certain points, I think that the right was right, such as perhaps when Florida reopened under Ron DeSantis before most other states. You can make a good case that that was good policy. But which side is more authoritarian? It doesn't seem like a particularly compellingly clear question and answer. All right, the left was more authoritarian in its desired COVID responses than the right. In other areas, the right may well be more authoritarian, but which side is more authoritarian probably depends upon the circumstances.
Obama saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens.
And this question is dirty because she is lining up five examples, arguments, diminishments of Donald Trump before finally getting to her question. So this is a dirty tactic, right? A responsible tactic would be to ask one thing at a time. So it's no wonder that Donald Trump reacted badly to that question.
To go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabbit to describe black district attorneys. You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort.
So if you can't ever call any black behavior stupid or dumb or idiotic, right? So Rachel Scott is arguing essentially that blacks should be off limits to criticism or stinging criticism or public stinging criticism as black, simply because they possess some sacred status that they should be off limits to criticism.
So my question, sir, now that you are asking black supporters to vote for you, why should black voters...
Okay, that's not really a question. It's a rant packaged with examples presented in a way to make Donald Trump look stupid.
...trust you after you have used language like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been...
After you've used language like that, you could do the same thing to Rachel Scott. You could say, Rachel, based on your public comments here and here and here, like, why would anyone trust you based on you using language like that? You can select examples from anybody's life and make them look like a complete blithering idiot while remaining 100% factually accurate, right? Because we've all said things that, taken out of context or even taken within context, make us look idiotic, dangerous, psychotic.
Asked a question.
So there's a protocol to interviewing, all right? There's airline pilots, they follow protocols. Hospitals follow protocols. Throughout the professional world, there are protocols followed because you tend to get better results when people are habituated to following protocols. You do this, 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 this in this particular order. You check this, 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 this. And this habituation tends to produce more safety and better results than allowing people just to choose situations on their own. And there is a protocol for asking questions if you want to elicit the best answers. And one protocol is you don't put moral judgments in your questions. You ask open-ended questions. And so her question, not really a question, and it's designed to shut Donald Trump down. When people are the recipients of your moral judgment, they don't tend to open up to you. So what she's doing is violating all protocols for a productive interview for the sake of appearing tough to her reporter peers.
So, in such a horrible manner, first question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And I think it's disgraceful that I came here in good spirit. I love the black population of this country.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage in Utah, Jason Chaffetz, the former Republican congressman and Fox News contributor.
Okay, we're expecting to hear today or tomorrow the Democrats' vice presidential pick. And there's a fascinating angle to this, is that it is completely acceptable part of contemporary discourse to question whether the Democrats hate Jews too much to allow for the selection of a Jewish vice presidential candidate, because on the face of it, Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, seems to make the most sense. We had the mayor of Philadelphia leak that Josh Shapiro was going to be the vice presidential nominee on Friday. That happened. Was that just incompetence, or was this part of a strategy? Often political operations will leak things in advance, such as prospective picks, to see what the public reaction is. Now, why is it just considered completely acceptable for mainstream discourse to inquire, do Democrats just hate Jews too much to allow for a Jew to be the vice presidential nominee? Because if this situation occurred among Republicans, then the news media would be up in arms that this is outrageous, but you don't notice any outrage on behalf of the mainstream media over questioning whether or not whether or not Democrats can select a Jew. This is just conventional accepted discourse. All right, here's Jonah Goldberg.
I don't know. I mean, what does Rashida Tlaib say if he picks a Jew? And I just find the sort of the dog not barking on this point really kind of fascinating, and I do think it's worth our time. That said, what else are we going to talk about?
Jonah, let me just follow up. If she doesn't pick Shapiro, so let me back up. To me, the three issues that you're looking for in a VP, if you're smart and not the Donald Trump and his field of folks, popularity, she needs to moderate the ticket, and swing stateiness. And Shapiro wins on all of those. He has the highest favorability in his state, over 60%. He's clearly a moderate. He would send that message that Chris was talking about on like the vibes of like, hey, look, see, I like people who are moderates. And there is no path to the White House that doesn't run through Pennsylvania. So whether he absolutely can win Pennsylvania or not, it almost doesn't matter. To even give you the better shot at winning Pennsylvania is worth a whole lot. And so then the question comes, so why would you ever not pick Shapiro? And the answer seems obvious, because you believe that your voters are too anti-Semitic to tolerate a Jewish guy on the ticket. And we've seen that, right? So Kelly shows up for the Netanyahu speech. No one's protesting him as a pick. Shapiro's actually criticized Netanyahu, but they're protesting him. What's the difference? It's clearly not their positions on Israel. One of them's a Jew. So if she doesn't pick Shapiro.
So I don't like the framing of anti-Semitic, because it moralizes the brutal reality that different groups have different interests, right? The interests of Palestinians or the interests of many different groups predispose them to have a negative perspective on Jews, or at least the Jewish state, right? If different groups have different interests, then if your group has a negative reaction to blacks or to Jews, it may not just be bigotry and ignorance. It just may be that the interests of your group go against the interests of a different group, which I think is brutal reality, right? Sometimes the interests of Jews and Chinese are contradictory, or the interests of Jews and blacks, or the interests of Jews and Gentiles, or the interests of Jews and Arabs, or Jews and Muslims are at odds, right? Different groups tend to have different hero systems, tend to want different things. Human desires are infinite. Material resources are limited. Inevitably, groups are going to come into conflict with each other. I don't like the unnecessary moralization of what simply boils down to significant conflicts of interest. So is it Gen X Democrats or Boomer Democrats who are quote-unquote anti-Semitic? Well, younger Democrats are more likely to have anti-Jewish attitudes because they are more likely to be people of color who have a hero system and a worldview and sympathies that are more likely to be at odds with majority Jewish hero systems and interests.
Is it anti-Semitism? And does that itself mean she kind of has to pick Shapiro?
No, I mean, like, I don't want to go that far. I mean, you can actually make an affirmative case for Waltz, I think. He's the one who launched 1,000 memes with the weirdness thing. He's really good at talking Midwestern and talking like a high school principal and a football coach. He won a Republican district, the only one to win that district in a long time. And even though it's tragic, even though he's only like 6 months older than Kamala Harris, he looks like he's from the World War II generation or something. It's sort of like me and David French. David's only like 5 months older than me, but he looks like,
my son has never called you great grandpa. Are you my great grandfather? Nate said.
But
adorably.
I do think I think that's fantastic, and I will be calling him great grandfather from now on henceforth. But I do think it's worth raising the question. Okay, so why didn't you pick Shapiro? Right? I mean, like, I think that's a perfectly legitimate question in an interview. It could be one she completely screws up. One of the arguments you hear is that Shapiro's really slick. He's kind of got a little bit of a Buttigieg, kind of like too clever for his own good kind of vibe. And that it is not the kind of vibe necessarily that Harris wants. I mean, I think she should pick Shapiro, but I think you could come up with you could talk yourself out of it for reasons other than, rank anti-Semitism.
Can I just say, guys, Mark Kelly has been to space, okay?
Yeah.
I think Mark Kelly has a lot going for him. But again, on those three categories, I mean, he is popular. Arizona is an important state. He is more moderate than she is, but he's just like...
Okay, so the Democrats chose to put Doug Emhoff out there publicly to make the case for abortion. So let's get some audio.
Doug Emhoff traveled to Georgia to hold an event focused on mobilizing men to advocate for reproductive rights. He joined NBC's Yamiche Alcindor after the event for an exclusive interview.
It's a topic rarely discussed and one the second gentleman is focusing on, the role men can play in advocating for abortion rights.
It is a medical health care crisis.
On Tuesday, in an exclusive interview with NBC, Doug Emhoff said he wants men to see reproductive health care as an issue impacting the fundamental freedoms of everyone.
This is an issue of fairness to women. Women are dying. It's affecting men's ability to plan their lives. And it's also an issue of what's next. What other freedoms are at risk?
Emhoff spoke to NBC in Atlanta, where he convened a panel on the role men can play in pushing for abortion access. The event was timed to mark the 5th anniversary of Georgia's 6-week ban on most abortions.
Being in this position of being second gentleman and also being the first man ever to be in this role, it just would be...
So the Democrats chose to put him out there knowing that he'd had an affair and gotten his nanny pregnant. So when you put yourself out there publicly advocating for something, and then it turns out that your private behavior is relevant to the public policy position that you're articulating, right, you are inviting scrutiny of your private behavior.
Wrong for me not to use this microphone to advocate for this issue.
What's your message to the many male lawmakers that we've seen be part of restricting abortion rights?
Stop it. Listen to the people in this country. See what's going on. Listen to doctors. Listen to nurses. Listen to men and women who...
There's no profound moral wisdom that is exclusive or predominantly coming from healthcare workers. All right, a doctor or a nurse inherently, intrinsically have no more superior wisdom on the morality of abortion than plumbers and landscapers
who are suffering because of those actions.
As part of his efforts, Emhoff said he's been talking to men across the country and in his personal life.
I'm talking about this with my other dad friends. I'm talking about it with my son, about how...
I'm talking about this with other men who have affairs and get women who have much lower social status than them pregnant. So this woman got fired from her job, right? His kid's school teacher at the Willow School in Culver City, right? She got fired from her job because he impregnated her. So there are all sorts of vices, as Adam Smith makes clear in his 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations, that the upper classes can engage in with relatively little price to be paid that can be absolutely devastating for the lower class. So middle-class kids, for example, they can often listen to rap music. They can often enjoy promiscuous sex and some pornography and dabble in drug use without it destroying their lives. But any of these individual vices for people with fewer resources, perhaps less discipline, lower IQ, would be absolutely devastating. And what people on the top of society do, right, trickles down to below. And so high IQ people with a lot of resources can get away with a lot of these vices, which when adopted by the lower classes will be absolutely devastating.
How this is going to impact him and how he's going to start a family or not.
Yeah, he's out there and he's getting people pregnant as he's promiscuous, and that can really get in the way of your career.
Tuesday's event was a collaboration between Emhoff and a group called Men for Choice, which has held other gatherings with the second gentleman.
So I'd say about half of the women I've known well have had abortions. I had a girlfriend who put it this way: abortion is just something that every woman goes through, right? She was a secular left-wing Jewess. She said that she'd never had an abortion, but it does seem. What are the statistics? Is it approaching 50% of women who have abortions?
Cecil Price III is a Morehouse student and a member of Men for Choice.
It hurts me to see that potentially the rights of my sisters, of my mother, can be taken away. And I have a responsibility and a duty as a brother, but also as a leader to advocate for them.
Meanwhile, several women, including Shawana Moore, said they welcomed men organizing around abortion.
Wow, what a completely one-sided NBC News report.
All hands on deck.
Moore, a nurse, said her husband speaking up for her soon after she had their son saved her life.
I had to have emergency C-sections. I had too much bleeding and my blood pressure was basically plummeting. But it was my husband who really advocated for my health and well-being. And
good comment in the chat. Doug Emhoff is playing to the banging the babysitter demographic. And okay, of men I know well, my sense is that probably a third of them have banged the babysitter. Right, men I know well tend to have resources, and they tend to have successful careers. They tend to be millionaires, and they tend to have babysitters, and most men are willing to risk everything for the opportunity to have sex with a young, attractive woman.
That's critical. Meanwhile, like his wife, Vice President Kamala Harris, and President Biden, Emhoff pointedly criticized for.
And why does it matter? Because if a man is enjoying a great sexual relationship, he's going to be more willing to sacrifice and protect that woman who he's banging on a regular basis than anyone else, right? He'll be more likely to sacrifice and protect her than his own wife, than his own kids, than his job, than his reputation. All right, a man will give up everything to protect the woman that he's banging. And so that's why the sex life of politicians is important, because the normal man is going to give his highest priority to the woman with whom he's having great regular sex.
Former President Trump.
And this is why women in particular fear men having affairs, because a man is most likely to direct his resources towards the woman that he's having the most sex with.
And underscored what he believes is at stake in November.
This is a binary election. You've got the former president on one side who is celebrating the overturn of Roe v. Wade, saying women must be punished. And then on the other side, you've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who are on the right side of each and every one.
So between 1994 and 1995, I slept with about 20 women. And I'm neither proud nor ashamed of this. I don't think it's morally good. But this is the perspective I take on my past, because it best enables me to talk honestly and to reflect honestly on my past. I was doing the best I could to meet my needs with the tools that I then had at my disposal. One of the downsides with a great amount of promiscuity is that it also ironically incurs the most astronomical amounts of self-control to keep it from being ruining. So on the one hand, you're exhibiting the least self-control because you're willing to consistently drop your standards to get off. So a lot of the women that I slept with were women that I would not want to be seen in public with because they were perhaps quite overweight. On the other hand, there were a handful of occasions, maybe 3 occasions in total, where I was just starting a sexual relationship with a woman and I'm engaging in intercourse with her and she changes her mind and says, stop, I don't want to do this. And it took every ounce of my self-control to stop in those situations. And I did. I think it only happened about 3 times, but it was absolutely excruciating to stop in the middle of sexual intercourse. But that's the kind of self-control that you must exhibit if you're not going to get someone pregnant or you're not going to vastly increase your chances of crime. There's a terrific Netflix true crime documentary series, Homicide LA, Homicide New York, just chilling stories of murder and how they caught the murderers. Once you start having affairs, once you start becoming sexually promiscuous, you are likely bringing in a whole lot of chaos to your life, and people will often kill over sexual affairs. And when you're having these intimate, sexual liaisons with people you don't know very well, the chances of things just going wildly out of control incredibly spiral, and they demand levels of self-control that you don't have to exhibit in normal life. You don't want to have to rely on your self-control, because we all only have limited amounts of our self-control, and ideally you want to set up a life where you depend on your self-control as little as possible. But if you are sexually promiscuous, you're often going to be called upon to use every ounce of your self-control if you want to stay out of trouble, you want to avoid catching an STD or spreading an STD or getting someone pregnant or, violating their consent. Understanding what constitutes consent has dramatically changed over the past few decades. Whew. I would go to parties and I'd pick up on certain women, and on at least one occasion, maybe two occasions, I remember being alone in a car with a woman or going on a first date with a woman, and I'm highly attracted to her. She seems to be highly attracted to me, and I'm just starting to make my physical move on her, and she'll go, I need you to know that I'm married. And then it would take every ounce of my self-control to stop, because I always had the moral standard. I should not, never must ruin someone's marriage. I should never have sex with a married woman. To the best of my knowledge, I never did. But it would require every ounce of my self-control, because married women will sometimes use the affirmation that they get from men wanting to date them, men being attracted to them. And so they will taunt you and tease you and play you along. And then when you're most vulnerable, they'll spring on you that she is married. And it's like, and wow. All right. So there are feats of self-control that people with, say, an extraordinary history of self-control, or with more resources than your average person, or a higher IQ, someone who's better able to see the future and the consequences of not exercising incredibly painful levels of self-control, is going to pull off, that someone with a 100 IQ and fewer resources is going to be less likely to pull off. I mean, civilization would fall apart if everybody had the number of sexual partners that I have had, particularly in my year of promiscuity, 1994 to 95. And I slept with far fewer people than I could have, because many times I just was not psychologically up for messing around. All right, there were countless occasions when attractive women that I guess part of me wanted to sleep with, but I just wasn't up for the challenges and complications and the vulnerabilities that come with an intimate sexual encounter. But back to this NBC News report on Doug Emhoff's campaign for abortion rights.
One of these issues.
And Yamiche joins me now on set. Thank you so much for bringing us this interview. And look, the president, the vice president, the second gentleman.
Okay, here is Doug Emhoff on his Jewish heritage.
As the world prepares to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day in honor of the 6 million Jews and millions of others murdered by...
Right, if you want to speak out making the case for Jewish values and the beauties of being Jewish, then your own private behavior is going to get much more scrutiny. I suspect that this nanny teacher who Emhoff impregnated and got her fired from her job is probably not Jewish.
By the Nazis. I had the chance to speak exclusively.
And there are devastating stories that I've heard in Jewish life where married Jewish men, right, with multiple children have affairs with a non-Jewish nanny. And once a man is having a hot sexual relationship, he is predisposed to giving up everything for the sake of that hot sexual relationship. And so many a Jewish man has lost everything, has lost his family, lost his job, lost his position in his community, lost his religious and spiritual life as he's followed his penis into non-Jewish women, and ruined his own life, ruined his family, and ruined the non-Jewish nanny's life. And often Jewish men have given up everything that they have built over many years and essentially followed their non-Jewish sexual partner into a life of exile.
Exclusively today with second gentleman Doug Emhoff about his own efforts to fight anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred.
So Jews who most practice Judaism are the least likely to get out there to fight anti-Semitism. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to fight anti-Semitism. From an Orthodox Jewish perspective, this is a pointless endeavor compared to the overwhelming imperative of following the commandments, none of which contain the admonition, fight anti-Semitism, right? This is a way for people who don't practice Judaism, right, who are not sacrificing for a traditional Jewish life, to retain some semblance of connection to their tradition.
You're the first Jewish spouse of a U.S. vice president or president, for that matter, and we're sitting down as the world is getting ready to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day in the wake of the horrific October 7th assault on Israel, the deadliest day for Jews, as you and I well know, since the Holocaust. Why is it especially important to commemorate this day this year?
Well, that was a genocide, what happened in the Holocaust. As they say, we can never forget. I was there at Auschwitz last year at International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that this past year, I've been profoundly affected by that experience, what I saw. It's never left me, and in fact, it's informed the work that I have done with the administration on fighting anti-Semitism, hate of all forms, which was very prevalent prior to October 7th. And of course, since October 7th, we've seen literally a crisis of anti-Semitism that has erupted.
So Mark Halperin on a video last night has noted that this Doug Emhoff affair story has behind the scenes destabilized the Kamala Harris campaign. Now, Emhoff boasts in the press that his goal is to be there for his family, because one thing you can do for your children is have an affair with a popular teacher at their school that causes her to leave her job. Right? Kids never talk or tease about things like that. So the Kamala Harris campaign is telling journalists off the record that there is no child, but they do not respond to questions about whether the pregnancy was aborted. If there was a financial settlement with the teacher, there must be a non-disclosure agreement with the teacher. So powerful people, all right, can screw around and then get a handle on stories by paying people off and having people sign non-disclosure agreements. Fairly amazing that the Kamala Harris campaign can get the press to not report something, the pregnancy, by simply refusing to admit it or to respond. At this point, the pregnancy should not be hard for journalists to confirm, even if they don't trust the Daily Mail. Weird that the New York Times does not mention that the woman was also the Emhoff's nanny, something that the Daily Mail reports. New York Times leaves out that the woman had to leave her job because of this, whether she was pregnant or not. This seems like a key detail. New York Times tries to render this story as boring as possible. There is a supportive statement from Doug Emhoff's first wife, the one that he lost over this affair. In the CNN news story, there is no supportive statement from his wife, Kamala Harris. So neither the Biden camp nor the Trump camp leaked this Doug Emhoff affair story where he knocked up his nanny teacher. Right? Many journalists have known about it since 2020, but because I guess Doug Emhoff belongs to a sacred cause, the cause of the Democratic Party, no journalists published this story until now. So her main job was a teacher at a private school, Willows in Culver City, where Emhoff's kids attended. She moonlighted as a nanny with the Emhoff family. She lost her job at the school after the affair was discovered by Emhoff's wife. So this teacher paid the price for everything, not Doug Emhoff. And so Doug Emhoff says that he wants to mobilize men for the cause of abortion, right? How this is going to impact men, how he's going to start a family or not. Right, back to CNN.
Here in the United States, but in fact all around the world. So it's really important, as this date is coming up, to commemorate the horrors of millions, 6 million Jews slaughtered, and we both saw with our own eyes, Wolf.
Right, if you're going to be taken seriously on sacred subjects, then it requires either a certain level of propriety in your own behavior, or you're opening yourself wide up for valid criticism.
How it was done in those chambers and the crematoriums, and in the case of my family and millions of others, is shot in town squares and buried in ditches. A true Holocaust, a genocide, and it's so important that we never forget that and know that it happened. Push back on this misinformation and disinformation and lead with education.
I was at Auschwitz this past April. It was so powerful, so moving for me as a child of Holocaust survivors. What moments from your experience visiting Auschwitz stay with you to this day and sort of jump out at you all the time?
I remember the starkness, the coldness, the barbed wire, the gun turrets, and as you know, it's preserved almost how it was. You just feel the desperation and the horror. And for me, it's looking at the personal effects, the shoes, the glasses, the hair of those slaughtered. to see the gas chambers and the crematoriums. You see the train that brought people in, some who just were led right to the gas chamber. It stays with you in such a visceral way.
So the arguments for same-sex marriage are much easier to make on the pro-same-sex marriage side, because the primary arguments from a conservative perspective are that same-sex marriage destabilizes traditional values. And that's also a key conservative argument against abortion, that it destabilizes and desacralizes sex. And that's not immediately viscerally compelling if you don't hold to a traditional perspective on life. And so Patrick Buchanan gave a culture war talk in the 1992 Republican Convention, right, saying that the United States is a republic, that a republic requires citizens of a certain character, and that character is being eroded by the modern liberal state, by welfare, by paternalism of all kinds, right, by civil rights legislation. So normally a civilization develops standards by the vast majority of its population, because different groups have different hero systems and different standards. For example, if you have a lot of East Asians moving to an area, they will try to create a more rigorous public school district that will be much more demanding and will be a very different public school district if it were primarily a white public school district, or primarily a Latino public school district, or primarily a black public school district, right? Different ethnic groups, different racial groups have different hero systems, different levels of moral propriety. And so there's a cliche about East Asians driving very slowly and carefully. Well, East Asians, compared to white people, compared to Latinos, and compared to blacks, tend to conduct themselves throughout life much more carefully than other groups, right? They are more careful about who they have sex with. They are more careful about the kind of behavior that leads to STDs and unwanted pregnancies. They are more careful about getting an education, and as a result, they live longer. They have lower crime rates. They have more family stability. They earn more money per hour. They are more educated. And morality requires discipline. And it's a lot easier to maintain a hero system and a certain kind of moral discipline if you're in a homogeneous environment rather than a multicultural one. Because when you're living around a vast variety of hero systems, all right, it will tend to erode your commitment to your unique hero system, because you are increasingly exposed to what seems like the fictional nature of your hero system. Like, why should I sacrifice sexual pleasure when I see other groups having, many more parties and much more sexual debauchery than my group enjoys? Why should I limit myself when I see other groups seemingly having a lot more fun? And so as Americans become more multicultural, we have more competing hero systems, and that tends to undercut sexual discipline and other forms of discipline and other forms of morality, because people are going to be less likely to constrain themselves once they become increasingly aware of other choices, right? It's easier to constrain yourself if you don't think there's a choice. But when you notice other hero systems and other forms of sexual morality, that's going to have more of an influence on you, as opposed to living in a community where there's just one dominant hero system, where there's just one dominant morality. Here is an interesting perspective from Mark Halperin that is never brought up when Donald Trump is castigated for challenging the 2020 election results.
Things about it last time, though?
There were way too many changes made based on COVID that should have been done more clearly and more fairly, but that doesn't mean the election was stolen, and those were the rules, and that's our system works. But that's all that happened last time. But I think this time will be different, because I think there'll be more preparation to understand. I don't think there'll be the same patience for it. That's my hope.
I hope you're right. Are you not here?
Wow, what a commonsensical, erudite, pithy discussion there, compared to what you normally hear in the news media on this story. Let's get a burst here from Fox News.
Association disqualified both of them during its 2023 World Championships. The IBA said the two women failed gender eligibility tests. The IBA did not release specific details on how the women failed the test. Also, last year, the International Olympic Committee stripped the IBA from its power to run Olympic boxing over finance and management issues. The IOC also says the IBA's testing process that involved Khalif and Lin Yuting were not legitimate.
The tests themselves, the process of the tests, the ad hoc nature of the tests are not legitimate, and you'll also expect me to tell you that I'm not going to discuss the individual intimate details of athletes.
So my friend Elliot Blatt says in the chat, vote by mail is clearly meant to enable voter fraud. We don't have any evidence that that is true. If we had evidence that that was true, then we'd have a stronger case. Yeah, on a commonsensical basis, I can see how it would appear that vote by mail is more encouraging of voter fraud. But, bro, where are the studies? You're relying on your gut. You're relying on your intuition, bro. But those are weak epistemics. Where are your peer-reviewed academic studies that support your supposition that vote by mail is clearly meant to enable election fraud? So Pat Buchanan and his culture war speech is about, in large part, what happens when we unravel the moral fabric, right? When all sorts of things that were taken for granted, forms of self-discipline, start to drop away. So Republicans in 1992, writes Christopher Caldwell, August 2nd, may have been too swaddled in free market ideology to understand what they were hearing. Pat Buchanan only took a quarter of the Republican vote in 1992, but people who did understand it received the message like an electroshock. The Republican Party would live on as a racket for its networkers, but it would not be taken seriously by its base again until it figured out what Pat Buchanan was talking about. That process would take about 24 years until the rise of Donald Trump. So if we look at the popular discontent out of which Reaganism arose in the late 1970s, this makes sense, right? There was a worry that civil rights agitation, strengthened by the full might of the federal government, was becoming a means to boss people around and grind the faces of the poor. So you can't expand rights for one group without taking away rights for other groups. It does sound beautiful. It does sound immediately compelling to have civil rights. Right? What normal person does not want to see every citizen enshrined with some civil rights, but with the civil rights passed in 1964 and then in further iterations, they simultaneously took away other rights. So on the face of it, civil rights seem fantastic. On the other hand, they always come at a price of other rights. So your right to rent out your home to whom you want are reduced by the civil rights legislation. Your rights to hire who you want are reduced by the civil rights legislation. All sorts of private choices are impinged upon by the civil rights legislation, so much so that the original Constitution has effectively been replaced by a second civil rights constitution, argues Christopher Caldwell. So rights to freedom of association and rights to private property have been significantly reduced by civil rights legislation. So it was just a worry in the late 1970s. It was not yet a grievance, but it became writing on the wall. And the background, the moral fabric of society had been completely rewired by this extensive civil rights legislation and by the increasing dominance of a new understanding of morality. So the first George H.W. Bush era was a kind of soft despotism, right, operating under a system that journalists baptized political correctness during the 1989-1990 school year. This is the America of the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing and the invention of sexual harassment. So this brought about a hardening in the country's cultural Reaganism. And then this burned itself out after the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 and the explosion of Silicon Valley innovation. The problems seemed to be solved. That era ended, but the problems renewed themselves leading up to the election of Donald Trump in 2016. So the cultural part of Reaganism was more important than the economic. Right, the government's glaring failure in the years since Lyndon Johnson's reforms of 1964 and 65, especially in civil rights and immigration law, to recover anything like the freedom, self-rule, and fellow feeling of the America that they overthrew. Today's sometimes majoritarian populism is not yesterday's fringe discontent. So an elite can only rule if it is up against a disunited public, right? Because then when you have a multicultural public, then the elite can make alliances and continue its rule. But if the people discover common interests and band together, then the elite are much more likely to be replaced by a new elite. So Sam Francis, for all his disappointment with Republicans, he did not think of himself as fringe. Right? He claimed to speak on behalf of a profound social movement that reflects American society and that promises to dominate socially and culturally. You don't often hear Donald Trump speak this way, but there is the sense that there is a united people out there waiting to be aroused and to be activated to create a united populist people around a revulsion of the civil rights and liberal revolution of the past 60 years. So a key foundation of the traditional conservative right-wing worldview is that there is a social order that exists outside of you, as opposed to the liberal conception of the buffered self who's able to create meaning and morality, purpose, and a path forward in life just through the use of his own autonomous will. So the right-winger is most likely to have an ethos of do your duty, the liberal most likely to have an ethos of follow your bliss. And Ronnie Goodman's work in progress, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression on the Nature and Origins of Conservaphobia, explains this better than any other book of which I'm aware. So he notes that Amy Wax observes that rational liberals are unmoved and unimpressed by social conservatives' vague premonitions of erosion or unraveling of the social order. Remember, to be right-wing is to believe that there's a social order, a system of morality, purpose, and meaning to which your purpose in life is to conform yourself. And for liberals, conservative fears about the erosion of this social order is an inadequate basis for resisting changes that satisfy immediate needs and urgent desires, such as same-sex marriage. So traditionalists have these vague premonitions about the unraveling of the social order. And for liberals, these are just lingering pre-modern sensibilities, which should not be allowed to interfere with more modern forms of fulfillment. All right, let's get a burst here from a left-wing podcast, which is among the most successful podcasts. It's called If Books Could Kill. And these guys managed to put in like 20 times more insights per minute or per hour of show than I do. They are really good at what they do. So even if you disagree with their ideology, they are wildly entertaining, provocative, and if you have this perception of the left as just killjoys and dull and overly serious and unable to have a sense of humor about things, then you should listen and get an entertaining left-wing perspective. This is their episode on Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance.
Opportunity. He says that's part of it, but it actually gets the real problem backwards. The real problem is a decaying culture, which in turn creates or worsens poverty. Oh. He tells the story of working in a warehouse where there was a worker who was chronically late and would take multiple very long breaks every day. When the guy is fired, he lashes out at the boss, saying, like, how could you do this to me? Vance says that this experience taught him that the problems with the region, quote, run far deeper than macroeconomic trends and policy, and that there are, quote, too many young men immune to hard work.
I thought there were all kinds of statistics about social mobility in the United States, but it turns out that a lazy guy got fired and was mad about it. So who's to say what's right?
The prevailing theme of the book is that working class whites would be able to lift themselves out of poverty if only they believed it were possible. And it's their negativity, their learned helplessness, that keeps them down.
Einstein taught us that the universe evolved from thought and that time is an illusion.
This is the overlap between The Secret and Hillbilly Elegy. It's true.
To believe this about America, you have to believe that compared to other developed nations, we just have higher rates of bad attitudes. And like, that's why there's more poor people in America than there are in Denmark.
Right. You're looking at an unemployment.
Or you just might have higher rates of low IQ people, right? If you have a lower IQ, right, you're less likely to have valuable job skills. You're less likely to see the future clearly. You're less likely to have empathy for other people. And the United States does have a significantly higher percentage of its population that has way below average IQ. Hence, the United States has all the dysfunction that you expect from significant low IQ populations.
Chart. And in your mind, it's just measuring laziness over time.
Right, exactly.
That's why he's always relying on anecdotes. He's not a data guy.
Right.
There are 21 citations in the book total, which is low in and of itself, but also especially weird because he often makes...
No, it's not especially weird because it's not an academic book. All right, it's a narrative book. It's a storytelling book. Okay, Israel bracing for an attack. As a convert to Orthodox Judaism, yeah, I'm paying particular attention to this. It hits me in the kishkas.
Alex. Hi, Arthel. Well, the region is bracing for what is likely going to be an Iranian response or a response by Iranian proxies. This as we've continued to see cross-border strikes between Israel and Lebanon on the northern side of the country. Take a look at this footage. This is what took place last night. Israel says today that it took out a Hezbollah launcher. This was after that. Hezbollah from Lebanon fired about 30 projectiles into northern Israel overnight. Most airlines right now are canceling trips to the region after countries like the U.S., France, and the U.K. are urging their citizens to leave Lebanon. Now, there's also new fighting in Gaza. That is where Israel says that in the last day it conducted new strikes that have killed as many as 18 people and dozens other are wounded. That's according to Hamas. These targets included a hospital and an old school, both of which the IDF claims are being used to make weapons. Now, today, Gaza's health ministry says that more than 39,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the start of the war. It has been 10 months since October 7th, and still today, Hamas has fired half a dozen rockets reaching as far north as central Israel. Now, here in Tel Aviv, unrest last night as protesters clashed with police. Demonstrators who are critical of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and families of the more than 100 hostages demanded that the government reach a deal. We saw some people in those crowds holding signs reading "Stop the War," but more violence here in the city after an attack today just outside of Tel Aviv.
So at its narrowest, Israel is just 9 miles across. So when you're a small, highly difficult to defend country with a small population, so you cannot afford a large standing army, you're much more vulnerable than your average nation state. And when you're more vulnerable, you're going to have to compensate for that in part with greater brutality, right? You have to have escalation dominance. You have to intimidate your adversaries so that they don't think that they can attack you. And it's a lot easier to be moral when you've got a large imposing standing army and you're protected by, say, natural barriers against invasion, such as if you're an island.
When a Palestinian man began stabbing Israelis at a gas station and a park. 2 senior citizens are dead. 2 others are hospitalized. Netanyahu is expected to hold a security assessment in about an hour from now. The prime minister also made this warning today.
So Israel's elites are overwhelmingly opposed to its right-wing government, and the most productive, affluent, financially successful sectors of the Israeli economy also tend to be the most opposed to Bibi's government.
The state of Israel is in a multi-front war against Iran's axis of evil. We hit each of its arms hard. We are prepared for any scenario, both in defense and attack.
Right now, the country's defense minister is currently holding a briefing. They are doing assessments of what would likely be an Iranian response and what that would likely look like here on the ground. Arthel.
Okay, live in Tel Aviv, Alex.
Okay, so the traditional argument about fears of moral erosion are more difficult to mount than immediate claims to rights, such as to same-sex marriage. So you have Justice Blackmun's dissent in Bowers versus Hardwick, where he argues that homosexuality involves no real interference with the rights of others. The mere knowledge that other individuals do not adhere to one's value system cannot be a legally cognizable interest, right? So this is how moral opposition to homosexuality is understood by liberals. It's just merely an annoyance. From a traditional perspective, right, gay sex creates a disequilibrium in the order of things. So from a liberal perspective, regulating other people's private, unobtrusive personal conduct out of a concern for the moral fiber of society is disingenuous. It's just some gambit to arrogate state power in the service of merely personal preferences. But if you've ever loved a car or loved an object, you know that we can place ourselves in things around us. And when you have a hero system, right, assaults to your hero system also will constitute very real visceral harm that you experience. And so if you happen to have a heterosexual hero system and you believe, for example, that marriage should be a heterosexual institution, that the military should be a heterosexual institution, then gay marriage and the open celebration of gays in the military is going to feel painful to you. It's going to be an assault on that which you hold sacred. So it used to be that those who lived sexually promiscuous and bohemian lives understood their way of life as appropriate only for a select few, for those superior souls who are capable of throwing off the shackles of bourgeois convention. But now you have this sexually promiscuous and bohemian life that is increasingly proselytized to the entire population. And now the elite see themselves as possessing a singular spiritual independence that they now want to transmit to the majority of the population. So what was once a curious, tiny subculture is increasingly a dominant culture. And that's in part the reason why we have ever increasing numbers of children born out of wedlock. So the liberal sexual mores that were previously a hobby of just a few members of the elite have mutated into a corrosive social nihilism that attacks the foundations of the American spirit from a conservative perspective. This is Ronnie Goodman's work in progress, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. So the kind of family that has been regarded for centuries as natural and normal, remember, prior to the last 25 years, you did not have same-sex marriage in any culture. And now the traditional nuclear family is often seen as pathological, that it is concealing behind the facade of respectability the new original sin of child abuse, right? Child abuse has been so stretched that it essentially means anything that you do that limits the fulfillment of your children. So smoking has now been elevated to the rank of a sin, while sexual promiscuity is tolerated as a matter of individual right and choice. Rape has been increasingly defined up to include any sexual activity that one participant has come to regret. So the elite have rejected the common sense of the benighted majority because its very commonness is an affront to their identity, all right? Throughout history, aristocrats have wished to separate themselves from regular people. That's why you would have rules about the type of clothing that you are allowed to wear and depend on your social status. But to be an aristocrat now means to continually invent ways that you can distinguish yourself from the common people. So the very identity of an elite in our society who has this elevated, buffered, liberal Enlightenment sense of morality presupposes a world that must resist their prescriptions, a world too common, too benighted to recognize their superior wisdom and morality, and thus all the more in need of lecturing and hectoring. So whether it comes to the rights of criminals or the merits of avant-garde art, there's always this pattern of seeking differentiation at any cost by our new aristocracy. This leaves conservatism essentially as a dissident culture, one that does not possess the high grounds of the means of cultural production. The elites of the dissident culture cannot begin to match in numbers or in influence those who occupy the commanding heights of the dominant culture, such as professors, journalists, TV and movie producers, and various cultural entrepreneurs. Even mainstream religion has fallen under the dominant culture's sway. one might have expected it to be at the forefront of the resistance, but now the mainline churches pride themselves on being cosmopolitan, sophisticated, undogmatic, and uncensorious, and so they offer little resistance to the prevailing culture. So conservatives for many, many decades wanted to believe that the people, as opposed to the elites, were still sound, still devoted to traditional values and traditional ways of life, and only superficially seduced by the blandishments of the counterculture. Now this confidence has eroded, as have the values themselves, as we have increasing levels of sexual promiscuity and out-of-wedlock birth rates and sexually transmitted diseases. So conservatives who claim cultural oppression now understand themselves not as representing the numerical majority, but what the numerical majority would be, but for the mass incentives of the liberal elite who are in control. So I stand by the perspectives of Not Born Yesterday, that book about how we did not evolve to be gullible, but certain moral disciplines, all right, are much harder to maintain when people given choices to not maintain those disciplines, right? Many disciplines are much easier to maintain when you don't think about having to make a choice to maintain sexual discipline. But in a multicultural society where the benefits of sexual promiscuity seem to be all around you, it's much harder to maintain your own sexual discipline. And so it's the steady erosion of our traditional values, of the traditional moral framework and bedrock of society, that is what's concerning conservatives, whether it's abortion on demand, same-sex marriage, and increasing respectability for deviant behavior. Now, our elites tend to lead fairly traditional lives, right? Most of the time conform to traditional ideals of morality and propriety, but they don't preach what they practice, right? They don't have these firm confidence in the principles, the traditional moral principles underlying their behavior. And so they are not making the case for traditional values, even though in their private lives, they're still living often by traditional values. All right, let's get more of this left-wing critique of J.D. Vance's memoir, Hillbilly Elegy.
Factual claims without citation. At one point, he says that you can't rely on surveys about how much people are working because working class people lie about how much they work.
Huge problem.
Okay, let's get Kip back
and then
the
later
show.
he refers to a
Kip,
groundbreaking
what's
study
going on,
about...
man?
Hey, man, just sitting here making pinto beans and ham, waiting for it to be done. And I was just listening to you. What a treat.
Thanks, bro.
I just wanted to, you were talking about women earlier. That's a constant thing, like something that gets stuck in the bottom of our shoes sometimes. So I was just wanting if I could rant for a minute or two.
Sure, go ahead.
Dating a 10 was damn near impossible. I noticed somewhere in your past that you had picked up, you were talking about the glory days earlier.
Yeah.
And I know you had picked up a porn star. Now, I don't know if she was top 10, top 100 or whatever, but she was definitely going to probably bring the kind of problems that I would like to describe to you a little bit. My cannibalistic, I've had some cannabis today, so I probably won't be able to describe it as best as I should. But it's just hard, man, because the whole world knows she's a 10. You can't hide it. Even I think if you put her in a damn igloo somewhere in Alaska, she's just going to draw men in like flies because she's a 10. And she can be the most loyal woman in the world, but it makes it very tough. Did you run into this with any of the women that you dated?
Yes, because I mean, just the more formidable, all right, the more valuable the woman you date, all right, the more competitors you're going to have for her.
Right. I mean, unless, I was a young man when I found this out the hard way, because there I was with a 10. You better have a castle and a moat with some alligators, and lots of shiny things to keep her occupied. Am I saying anything that you can understand here?
Yeah, I mean, and this is true. I mean, even in Orthodox Judaism, if you marry a hot wife, she is going to make more demands on you than if you marry a homely wife.
And it's a strange thing, but she deserves it. She deserves it.
Yes. Just as a man who is highly successful is going to be able to make more demands on his wife than a man who is less successful.
Her beauty not only gives the young guys a hard on, but it transcends generations. You get what I'm saying? You got competition with a 49 or 53-year-old guy for your 19-year-old gal, and he'll give her the moon. And you don't have that in your back pocket, but he's got it. You know what I'm saying? So it's just it's so hard. It's so hard. And there again, even a 10 to the eye is not going to be a 10, on the inside. She's probably going to have things that she's better than you expected, and some things like what the 10 I ran across was a hopeless, like romantic. And I'd come home after a hard day, and there would be like rose petals leading into the bathroom and flowers and a Enigma album playing in the background and all this romantic stuff. And, I've been having to plaster a smile on my face, being Mr. Businessman all day long. And here I have come home. And now I got to play another role. I just wanted to decompress. I just wanted to relax. And just something as simple as, at the time, I would like to sit there and watch home team sports and watch my Baltimore Orioles play baseball. And that was the way I wanted to decompress. But even those little few hours of the day, damn, Luke, you had to devote 90% of that to her too, because she deserved it. She had been cooped up in the house all day. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, yes. My dad would say, nothing for nothing and very little for sixpence. All right, there are demands that come with dating and relating to high status women.
When I saw that everybody in Chattanooga wanted her, I took a job in a place called Greensboro, North Carolina, thinking something might change. I plopped her down at a place called Harris Teeter, a grocery store, and inside of 2 weeks, she had candy given to her and cards, and a guy brought flowers to her, and you can't blame them. They got a 10 on aisle 7. They're going to do it every time, And
I tend to be lazy. Like I put tremendous energy into these shows and preparing these shows and writing my essays. And so I tend to skimp often on many other areas of my life. And even when I was promiscuous, I never put much effort into it. Right? I've rarely been willing to put much effort into dating and relating. And that has shrunk the pool of available women to me. I was just not willing to date a Miss World. For example, a friend tried to set me up with a Miss World, an actress in Mulholland Drive. And honestly, I just didn't want to put the effort in.
Yes. And it's, you got to be a Superman. You got to be that Ubermensch. You know what I mean? You really do, because her mama and daddy, when she calls home, they're going to remind her she's the bee's knees and deserves everything. So I don't know, the whole thing in the end, it was untenable. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. You could see that's something that I believe that was like 1993 or something like that. But that was a hard year, because looking back, the smart thing to do maybe just would have been to like put the ring on her finger and just try to ride that pony all the way. But my gosh, because she was fiercely loyal, but she was other things. And for some reason, I was going to be the thing lost. You know what I mean? I was going to be the thing that got lost just trying to follow this dream, because on one hand, I never thought I deserved this 10. What the heck did she see in me? So that part makes you want to like jump through the hoops and all that. But there comes a time when you're like, wait a minute, this is never going to end. This never ends unless she gets a horrible disfiguring car accident, Luke.
That's true. On the other hand, Kip, there are higher functioning people and less functioning people, and higher functioning people use opportunities like an astounding, amazing woman to become higher functioning, to develop in themselves higher level of production and capability and self-discipline and empathy. And so some people use these stimuli to develop themselves, and then other people are not willing to put in the work. But for some men, this challenge makes them better men.
Right. Well, I can tell you with me, it was the combination of her and a new job. I had a situation that I never had before or since, which is, man, I would have to pee. And there would be like, you would either find a bathroom in the next 30 seconds or you'd be peeing on yourself, man. I mean, it's embarrassing to say to you and your 10 cult members, but that was something that I don't know if it was the stress of trying to deal with the 10, or I don't know if it was the stress of trying to deal with the job, but it actually manifested one of those two things, or both of those two things manifested into about one of the only health problems I've ever had in my life. And it went away.
I've had the same thing. When the more pressure I get under, the less urine buildup I can handle without having to make it to the bathroom. Like if I have to embark on a challenge, I need to go to the bathroom first.
Man, yes. And along the same vein, I wouldn't call this girl a project, because I would just say in general, now we're just talking about in women in general, a young man thinks he can like take on a project. Anthony Cumia was one of these. He always had like a woman who had daddy issues. He would always pick that one out of the room, and that would be the one he would go for. But I learned at a young age, if it's something you got to break out the saw to fix, don't even try. If it's something you could just use the sandpaper to brush away some rough edges or whatever, that's one you want to put the effort in. But you can't change them more than 10%, because you wouldn't appreciate them wanting to change you more than 10%. You agree with that? You agree sometimes people take on projects that they really can't fix, but they think they can fix?
I think that's a self-flattering description. Here's what I think is really going on, that the desire to rescue and the desire to be rescued come from the same sick place. That no matter what's going on, we can never date and relate to anyone who is substantially more or less mature than ourselves. So whoever you end up dating and relating to is a mirror image of yourself, because if you are a little more mature than her, you could not stand to be in a relationship with her. And if you're less mature than her, she could not stand being in a relationship to you. So I think it's a very self-flattering description that Anthony Cumia is giving there. What's really going on is that his dysfunction level is matching her dysfunction level, only he is understanding his dysfunction in a noble sense that he wants to take her on as a project. But it's self-flattering. What's really going on is that she is revealing his level of dysfunction, and he doesn't want to face up to it. He just wants to put all the blame on her.
You're right. In fact, I could not ever relate to girls with daddy issues. You know what I mean? It's unrelatable. It's just specifically, it's unrelatable. And the one girl that did have daddy issues, I remember she would do strange things like put a pillow over me in the living room with people around and start jerking me off. I mean, strange things, just because she had equated love to like, let's go in the bedroom and take care of this right now. And for some reason that meant like love. That equated to all forms of love or whatever. So there again, that was like my only time ever dating a nymphomaniac. And guys think like, man, what a dream come true, a nymphomaniac. And I would be like, beware what you wish for there, buddy. Unless you're a machine, unless you yourself are a nymphomaniac, you don't want no part of that, because they start.
Yeah. Also, even women who are 10s, you show me any 10 and I'll show you a guy who's tired of having sex with her. Even with a 10, 2 months into a sexual relationship, your sexual desire for her is going to be 50% of what it was at the beginning. Also, most women who are sexually wild tend to be crazy outside of the bedroom. I can think of one particular exception in my life where I dated a very high functioning executive, and she was wild in the bedroom and also very effective and highly accomplished in the real world. But usually craziness in the bedroom equates with craziness outside the bedroom.
Right. And just outlandish behavior in general. You get what I'm saying? That
Yes.
she'll put you in positions you never fathomed you'd ever be in before. You know, so you're always in uncharted waters going, what the fuck? And the common denominator gets back to her fucking daddy issues or whatever it is.
What do you think about the idea that dysfunction that you're just describing is also putting up a mirror to your own dysfunction? Because only if you were equally dysfunctional would she be in your life.
I don't know, because the one I'm specifically relating to in my mind here is the one that had the daddy issues, and I found out early on you don't want no part of that, because I had been corrupted as a youth and I had gotten better, but I saw her as actually a corrupting influence. But to speak more to what you're saying though, it's a strange dichotomy, but really I want two things out of a woman, and maybe they can't be both of that. But what I want is an angel to raise my children, and then this temptress that'll raise my loins, because at the end of the day, I'm more of a meat and potatoes guy. So I need a woman that's willing to put on the lingerie or whatever, you know, to spark me in that way. But also I want this other woman, this angelic thing that I need to raise my kids. You see, that's asking a lot out of them, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is verging on the impossible. It's like a saying in Jewish life, I want to marry a Playboy playmate who studies Talmud. There aren't many Playboy playmates who study Talmud, but what you will always find is someone who's pretty much your mirror image. So almost everyone in a relationship thinks that they're so much more mature than their partner, and it's their partner who's damaged, but really your partner is just a mirror image of yourself. So during my periods of promiscuity or even during my relationships, I was always getting a mirror image of myself. When I went to a party and I met a woman and I started dating her, I was always zoning in on someone who was at pretty much the same level of dysfunction as myself. All right, I never managed to have a whole series of dates with women who are higher functioning than myself. Very early on, if they were higher functioning than I was, they would see that and they would not go for a second date.
Right. I wanted them sexy, but I also wanted them classy, but I also wanted them smart. And what I ended up getting is a lot of smart, and I ended up with lean towards smart. They definitely what I couldn't deal with. What I ended up doing is steering clear of what I couldn't deal with, and things I couldn't deal with that was a deal breaker would be like a flat-chested woman. I could not deal with a flat-chested woman. Like a woman could have like a flat ass. That's not a problem with me. She could have flat feet. That's not a problem with me. But she can't be flat-chested. That's a problem. That's a deal breaker.
Yeah,
so,
and flat-chested women tend to be the most responsible, right? Bigger-breasted women are more built for loving than for mothering. So the bigger the tits, usually the crazier the woman.
Right. I mean, in general, I look back at my lifetime has been, a series of fuck-ups. But early on, I look at the women game the same way as I look at the college game. I did the GI Bill. I should have tracked right into college, but I didn't. I went to be an entrepreneur and got right into finance because I didn't want to be pigeonholed into one college career. You got to pick one thing. And I had already seen in the Marines, when they put you on one thing, I was sick of those damn cipher machines. I didn't want to see another one. So I didn't know the one thing I wanted to be. And that was the same thing with women. I had like probably 4 that wanted to marry me, but I was thinking, well, the perfect one is just right around the corner. I better keep my options open. I better just.
Let me ask you a question there. So which of these two has most characterized your life? Follow your bliss or do your duty?
I mean, I love Joseph Campbell, but I feel like there is a duty. On one hand, I bring my own meaning to life because I know what you're saying there, but I also feel like I have a duty. See my mom and my dad still alive. So I still have duties there. So a little of both.
Right. But everything that you've described so far prior to the last 30 seconds has been follow your bliss.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am a follow your bliss guy.
Yeah.
So I am in that regard. So I'm not like I was never a super religious guy. I had checked on all that stuff. And when I saw nobody was kicking the tires, nobody was making any legitimate cases to any of that stuff. So what a shock it was to me when I became a Buddha, sort of, a mystic, an ascetic person in 2007, because I didn't even suspect it at all. But I've kind of gotten a little bit away from my point. I just want to tell you one more point about women, and that is that, I don't know, somewhere between the suffragettes and the flappers, we kind of unleashed what you might want to call Western femininity. And, I think it's been a disaster. And someday they'll be veiled again. You know what I mean? Because we'll see the error in our ways. I wish it could be dialed back, but for some reason, when these things get unleashed, they just get all the way unleashed, And then like a rubber band, it just swings back too far the other way. So you got any thoughts on that? I'd like to hear your opinion if you got one.
Well, we have steadily marched towards more and more rights for women, more and more feminism. So even though there have been turns towards tradition, overall, the more liberal feminist perspective has increasingly been winning in the first world.
Right. And you'd say, like, I'm not just talking specifically like products, or I'm talking about like concepts and jobs and what we might call the HR society that we all live in now. I mean, that shit, I felt like it just came along like in 1990 when I got out of the Marines. And to me, it didn't feel like a feminization of society at the time so much as it felt like I could see that the HR lady, she cared first and foremost about the owner and covering his ass and insurance liability and those type of things. And then this thing about women at that time, I mean, I just kind of thought it was just part of covering his ass, is making sure women ain't gonna bitch and get him in a lawsuit. But looking back now, I think it was just a whole feminization of society. I look back and I go, that Faustian spirit that men once had, it's long gone. How's it ever going to come back now that we live in this HR society? I don't know.
Right. The purpose of HR is to protect employers. It's not to protect the interests of workers. But I'm going to move on, Kip. But great to talk to you, man.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care. All right. Stephen James, jump on the show if you can.
About upward mobility in America, but he doesn't cite either one. And I don't think he's lying about them. I just think he's immune to the hard work of citing them.
Okay, hung low.
So
what's going on,
let's get a little
man?
bit big picture here. I don't want to harp on.
Luke, there's panic on the streets of London, panic on the streets of Birmingham. I wonder to myself, could life ever be sane again, Luke?
Yes, life can be sane again. I don't think 10 years from now we'll be talking a great deal about these riots, but what do you think of their significance? Like my supposition, without knowing much about what's going on, is that anyone with anything to lose is not participating in these riots, that only marginalized losers are participating in these riots. I find it hard to imagine that CEOs, that men with children and spouses that they want to protect with mortgages are out there participating in the riots. I don't think PhDs are participating in the riots. I don't think people earning £1 million a year are participating in the riots. I don't think people who've built up a good life are participating in the riots. My supposition is that these are overwhelmingly losers participating in self-destructive behavior.
Well, your assessment's probably correct. But look, it is an inflection point that's happened here in the UK. And there is something significant about this that's happened that, I mean, look, I'm tempted to go down your analysis. I'm tempted to go along with like Colin Liddell's analysis that these things will like fizzle out and stuff like that. But these things, the situation really has been building incrementally in the UK for about now, say 5 years, since this country struggled with the problem of stopping these young men who are travelling here on boats, arriving on the shores of the country. And it started in the tens of thousands, and now it's in the hundreds of thousands per year. And because they can't all go to one place, they're being bussed into local areas all across the country. And around a couple of years ago, the problem of the fact that local hotels were being filled with these people began to become known amongst the chattering classes, amongst the normal people. And now it's spoken about on normie Facebook, it's spoken about amongst boomers, everybody's aware, and each local area has its own issues. And so this has been a problem that's been simmering along. And then you have people who are instigators, who are of this kind of sentiment, like your Tommy Robinson type, who take advantage of these issues and have, say, certainly this summer, been calling for his instigators to go down to London on marches. And then 1 week ago, it's last Monday, there was a mass stabbing event of children in a local area north of Liverpool by the young son of immigrants. And it couldn't be starker. I mean, this was a black Rwandan young male who's just butchered 11 children, girls, and a dance class, a Taylor Swift themed dance class. 3 dead, under 10 years old each. Couldn't be starker. And like by Friday, I believe groups organically of probably like your assessment is correct. People who haven't got anything else better to do or anything else to lose are going out and kicking off. But it did start, in my opinion, I mean, I could be wrong about this, organically in the local area where it happened. There was a vigil going on where it happened, and it's full of Scousers, full of Liverpool people. They have a lot of Irish heritage, the Liverpudlians. They're quick to anger, quick to fire back. They have a history of not getting along with the police, a history of poverty. Things kicked off in the local area. The police came in, history of hating the police, and bricks started to be thrown at the police. And then Saturday, protests developed in other places around the country, and today they're continuing. So that's where we stand.
And what are the potential outcomes? Do you see any potential possibilities resulting from these riots?
So the potential outcomes, certainly the ones that I can be certain about are crackdowns on people who are against, willing to speak out against illegal immigration, and that. In the first instance, the Prime Minister, we have to also be aware we have a new Prime Minister, new Labour government, only 4 weeks old, who's looked incredibly weak, by the way. He didn't show his face yesterday. I know you've spoken about in the past how Joe Biden's appeared weak. The Prime Minister of the UK didn't even release a statement yesterday whilst there were riots around the country. And I know it's easy to dismiss these things, but it's unprecedented in my lifetime, at least, me hearing about this happening. He's come out now, and of course he's doubling down on that these are illegal riots. We're going to throw the book at these people. There's no question about it. But the issue is, Luke, he's thrown some gasoline on the fire because these people already were angry. They were already fighting on the streets. They were already smashing things up. these people aren't the type of people who kind of listen to reason, and he had no conciliatory. There was no sense of whatsoever of that. There is no tone. There is no conciliatory tone from the government or Prime Minister as yet, and it stands in complete contrast to when the Black Lives Matter riots started. For instance, there is this hashtag trending now called two-tier Keir Starmer, because there is this widely held belief within the United Kingdom that if you're an ethnic minority, you are treated one way, which is the police will let you off, the police will look the other way. You'll get away with a lot of stuff, you'll get away with crimes even. But if you're a white English person who generally follows the law, then you'll be immediately arrested and have the book thrown at you. And so there's this widely held belief that there is a two-tier policing system here in the UK, and like the actions, the response from the Prime Minister and the government so far has only been to heap fuel like upon that fire, because at the same time there are Muslim gangs forming in areas in the UK doing Muslim patrols. I mean, if you look at I think Andy NGO on Twitter has been covering some of this. There's Muslim gangs who formed in the UK, and there's evidence or there's video evidence of the police like speaking to them in a softly way and telling them on camera, look, discard your weapons in the mosque and we're here to protect you, but discard your weapons in the mosque so that you don't get caught with them. And the Prime Minister's coming out and just only naming the anti-migrant protests. He's calling everybody far right, that they're Nazis. So we're at an inflection point, basically, Luke.
Right, and without really knowing much about these riots, I see that the only possible outcome is increased government repression of speech and more stigmatization of these right-wing groups, and there will be a systematic, high-tech, effective lynching of the people who participated in these riots, that they'll have their lives ruined, and consequently people will respond to incentives and be less likely to join such movements. So the only outcome that I can fathom is the government crushes this movement. So when you say an inflection point, I think you seem to be implying that there are other possibilities than what I just outlined.
So, well, I mean, the Black Lives Matter thing, would anybody have expected that the government would acquiesce to look? I know you must think I'm fanciful in thinking that there is any other possible outcome than absolute oppression, repression of these protests. And you're right, that is the response of the government. That is where they're going. They've doubled down on it just a couple of hours ago. But Luke, the protests haven't stopped yet. Okay, in fact, they've inflamed even more so since the Prime Minister came out a few hours ago. I've been speaking to somebody who's been out onto the ground in one of the areas. He says that these lads who are like operating on the streets, they're largely Zoomers. They have their faces covered. They are actually organized in a way that you wouldn't expect. They are they're up for it. They're angry, and they don't care. And here's what's likely to happen: is if the police can't get a hold of it, then the army might have to come out onto the streets, and that would be unparalleled. That would be unprecedented. And because we're only 4 weeks into a Labour government, politically this could be destabilising for the government. I mean, it's like for 4 weeks into a government to end up having to call the army out on the streets because you're unable to like get a hold of this quickly, could be politically destabilising. I'm not sure. But all I'm trying to say is that we are at a point here in the UK where there are communities who are poverty-stricken. They are being filled with migrants. There is this phenomenon that is a real phenomenon of hotels who are housing largely African men who, en masse, in hotels, within communities, and these are the areas that are becoming the flashpoints. Like there's one in Rotherham, a large Holiday Inn hotel, effectively today was surrounded and sieged by hundreds of people, and outside there were, as well as thugs and gangs, of course, doing most of the stuff. There were lots and lots of local people who really have had enough. So yes, there will be a backlash now. The police will get lots of these people, but part of the deal is here in the UK that the laws aren't actually very tough. So it's not like all these people will go to prison immediately. They're probably used to this kind of in and out of the police station business. And I predict that this will continue actually for, I don't know, a few weekends at least. This is what I'm expecting.
So if this were a Muslim or a black uprising, you'd have a large number of articles in the news media talking about the oppression that these people have suffered, and that's what's given rise to this rioting. How much sympathy is shown for the rioters in the mainstream media in the UK?
Zero, of course. And I mean, nobody here in the UK, of course, wants riots. Nobody. And I get your point. Your point is that, like, but also, I'm not explaining myself here. I'm trying to say, I get your point that the media really is important, but also part of what you say is that you think that the media actually controls people's, like, deeply held beliefs, only 0.1% or something, or less than that. So you have to understand that there really is deeply held discontentment in these communities where these migrant centres have been held. I mean, this isn't the only inflection point that we've had, but it's the only one that's really kind of have turned to violence in multiple areas, like in a flash pan, due to an incident. And so it's hard to predict where this is going. But you're right. There is zero sympathy in the media for them. These people are portrayed as thugs. The average person on the street doesn't agree with it, but they also know deep down in their belly why it's happened, which is different. Why it's happened, and yeah, I don't know what else to say, to be honest, Luke. It's hard.
Well, you know of Enoch Powell and his Rivers of Blood speech, and in reaction to that, he had the overwhelming sympathy of the British people, and he had almost complete opposition from the elites, and the elites absolutely crushed him and the nascent movement that grew up around him. So what would you say the chances that this leads to the fall of the government?
Slim, 5 or 10%.
Well, that's significant. I mean, that if it's even 1%, that's significant.
I just think we could be seeing that they might really have mishandled the situation. This narrative that there is two-tier policing is actually a correct one in many ways. So if they can't get a handle on this quickly, then it will get out of control. So if the army has to be brought onto the streets, then I mean what? But it's hard for me to give you an assessment, but this is what I'm saying. I see Colin Liddell in the chat as well. He also obviously thinks it's kind of insignificant, and I feel, without being able to express it clearly, that I feel like there is something different about this, and I don't doubt, that it will be repressed by the government. That 90% chance, 95% chance, is that they will get a handle on it. They will lock these people up, and they will fizzle out. But the UK is always one or two incidents now away from these kinds of flaring up incidents. And what happens in a month's time, you know, when there's another Manchester Arena bombing of children, or God forbid, or something like that, or again, children being slaughtered by another African migrant. I mean, you either believe that the British people will take it forever and that there will be no consequences to this, or that at some point, like, some eggs are going to get broken in a very messy way. Like, it's not what anybody wants. Nobody actually wants this, who is like law-abiding, who is upstanding, who like just, you know, wants their normal life, but would like a few, you know, a little less illegal immigration, please. This isn't what anybody wants. Nobody wants the police to get bricked. But you're kind of also aware that when like a revolt against it happens, it is the people who have nothing to lose who kind of stand up against it, who do lead the charges on the streets, who are the crazy ones. And when it happens, it's not how you wanted it to happen. It's a messy process, and like I say, a lot of eggs get broken in the process.
I'm thinking of so many analogies to this, but one philosophical principle is that which cannot continue will not continue, and what cannot continue are the astronomical rates of immigration into the United Kingdom. That cannot continue whether you've got a left-wing government or a purportedly right-wing government. The amount of immigration that the United Kingdom has absorbed over the past 27 years is unsustainable, and everyone's going to respond to incentives, and this has got to feel like a punch in the face for the British government. And even if they don't agree with the rioters, they inevitably are going to take away some lessons that they don't want to get punched in the face like this again. And this may well have an immigration restrictionist outcome.
Yeah. So, I mean, and of course, that would be the smart political play to make, whilst not to tolerate, not to excuse any of the criminal violence, okay, which nobody in Britain wants. Nobody here wants police, you know, the police attacked. They don't even want mosques to be, you know, slightly damaged in the process. Nobody actually wants any of this. They just want a political resolution to, like, even just illegal immigration. I mean, the Overton window doesn't even have to stretch to mass legal migration. Just the illegal stuff, which is out of hand. I mean, it's easy for people in this, like in the dissident right, to say, the illegal immigration doesn't matter. This is like a red herring, and the legal migration is what matters. They're right about that. But here in the UK, on this small island of like 70 million people, right, 100,000 illegal immigrants from the continent of Africa, who are amongst the worst people, being bussed into local communities everywhere around the country, really is having a stark, shocking impact. And I mean, it is only a matter of time before, I think, they have to get a grip on this. And so, look, there was a police commissioner today, Luke. I think she's one of the highest ranking in the UK, who released a statement.
Is she a lesbian?
I don't know, but she did release a statement today where she acknowledged that there are issues that have, like, to be politically addressed, and she took that statement down within hours. Okay. Her name is Donna Jones. She's the chair of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners for Hampshire, which is down in London, and the Isle of Wight. And she acknowledged like the issue, and basically said that the government needs to address the sentiment of the people who are, even though that the writing is bad, nobody agrees with it. The government has to address the real concerns of the people on the streets that are behind it. But the Prime Minister has come out today and declared again, he's doubled down, that it doesn't matter why people are out there doing it. Obviously, that these people are just criminals, and it's got to stop. So
now, if these rioters get increasing elite support, all right, this woman is part of the elite. I just looked her up. She does have a substantial position, and that she was brave enough to say this publicly. At a certain point, a dam will burst, because what these rioters are furious about has reality. It's not just some fictional construct. And so at a certain point, the dam will burst, and there will be more and more expressions such as what Donna Jones made by elites.
Yes, exactly. And by the way, just so that you can see that I'm right, I sent you on DM the tweet that she put out. So it's not a fake or anything. She put this tweet out, and I mean, I can also. There's a
I
screenshot
found
of her
articles.
message.
Anyone can just Google Donna Jones commissioner, and they'll find what we're talking about. It's easy to see, and I would suspect that a large number of the elite do feel the same way, but they're not willing to suffer the consequences of publicly expressing what they see. But at a certain point, the pressures to be civil are going to be overwhelmed by the pressure to tell the truth. And it is possible at a certain level of intensity, you'll have more and more of the elite come forward with similar expressions to what she put out there.
Yeah, so if the government don't do something to curb the problem and these riots continue, I mean, I don't see where else this is going. I don't see where else this is going except being politically destabilizing. So we'll have to see what happens. I don't really have much else to say about it.
Yeah, what are the odds that these rioters are more intense about what they're doing than their football allegiances?
What do you mean by that?
Well, Colin Liddell is making the argument in the chat that once football season starts, that they'll have other concerns. I know for many, correct me if I'm wrong, but for many British men, their number one allegiance is to a particular football club, not to any brand of politics or even nationalism.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm tempted as well to be just as cynical as Colin is about this entire thing. I really am. And it's not a bad bet to make. 90% chance this will fizzle out. The government will get control. All I'm saying is there's something in the air here that feels different, that really does feel different. And the way that we've seen Muslim gangs come out onto the streets, certainly yesterday and today, I think it's also been happening, versus white people. These are real race riots that have kicked off. White versus ethnic minority. And this is something that's hard to put back into the box once it's out there. Now, if you believe like that the football hooligans just like a fight, they like 5 pints in a fight, well, now they've tasted like the blood, in some cases literally and also metaphorically, of a different kind of a fight. There were scenes in Belfast yesterday, Luke, of Irish Republicans joining arms with Ulster Unionists and marching against illegal immigration in Northern Ireland, which is unheard of. That's never happened before. That this, everybody's absolutely shocked that this You know, it's even a thing, even a possibility. So it feels different. That's all I can say. It feels different this time.
Yeah, I believe you. That there does seem to be something different about this, and it's the first time that I can recall in recent years where the white population has reacted with such intense rioting. I can't think of anything else similar to this in the First World.
Yeah, and I have been watching lots of these live streams. There's what's different as well, because we're in the modern age, is whenever these things kick off, there's somebody there with a phone live streaming it on YouTube. So I have been looking at many of these, watching them, and the violence is being done by small, but not super small, a sizable majority in each area, but a small minority, and then following those people on like the periphery are what I would say are like 10 times, 15 times, 20 times that number of normal people, boomers, women, even, women and children. And so it's as if, they're just like watching the violence and the disorder go on, but it's as if like there is a greater cause that they're there for. And yes, some people are breaking some eggs, and nobody wants it, and they're all looking on aghast at it, but they're also there in support of like the greater premise for why they were out there in the first place, if I'm making any sense at all here.
I don't know if you pay. Yes, you make very good sense. There's an interesting tweet here. BBC cuts off former Detective Chief Superintendent of the Met when he starts dropping truth bombs. So I don't know if you pay much attention to how the BBC is covering this.
Well, I haven't looked at the BBC today. Obviously, the media is just absolutely in full condemnation mode. So you're not going to see anything on the mainstream media about this. Colin Liddell asks SJJ why there are no riots in the South. The cynical, take on this that I've seen Colin give, and I love Colin, so we can disagree now and again, and he'll end up probably being right in the outcome. So it's all good and fair. The cynical take is, well, look, my take is that the northern areas are deprived, okay? The northern areas are like the Labour heartlands that have suffered poverty and deprivation, and are the traditional white working class areas that have, like mine, I live personally in one of the most deprived areas in the United Kingdom. So I live in a former mining town here on the outskirts of a city in the UK, and it's in, I think, something like the bottom 5% or 5 to 10% of one of the most deprived areas. 10 years ago, in the area, I hadn't seen, and this is going to sound crazy, I hadn't even seen a black man, okay? Who lived here, obviously, maybe passing through or something, a delivery driver I've maybe seen, but as in living here, I hadn't even seen it. Now, there are gangs of young African men who roam the streets. If I want to go to the bus station, I have to go through gangs of them, like 20 deep, smoking ganja, outside the bus station, outside the train station. The town has been transformed massively. And on top of that, all the hotels in the local area are essentially full of these people. And there are cases and cases of like women being harassed, of incidents with children. And so just knowing this on a local level, that this is like a simmering problem, that everyone that you speak to speaks about it. The boomers are aware of it. The norm is that you wouldn't speak about it on Facebook. Knowing this firsthand in my local area, I can imagine that this is the case in lots of the other similarly deprived areas, that they've gone through rapid racial and therefore cultural transformation in like the last particularly 5 years. It's particularly stark since COVID for whatever reason. And so that's my take on why it's not in the south. It's mainly in the north. These are in the really deprived areas, people have had enough, and they've got no money, so they might as well riot.
Here's another analogy. I don't know what your life experience is like, but when I have hurt somebody unnecessarily and they react with anger, they rarely react in the most rational way. They're just filled with rage, and it just pours out of them. They don't present a rational, usually irrational case. And when people are angry, they tend not to react in the most measured and rational terms. And so this is one way that I understand these rioters. They just a switch is flipped in their head, and just because they're not presenting a 15-point rationally argued thesis does not mean that the concerns that they're addressing are not real.
No, they're normal people. I mean, on local levels that aren't reported, there have been incidents like at these asylum centres, at these hotels, probably in each of the local area. Again, I know in my local area that there have been like police incidents at these hotels. Like there's been girls raped outside, and therefore what's happened, in the local areas, it's known that it's a migrant that's done it, and therefore locals have turned out in response to these areas. Police have turned up, and they've turned into like gatherings, and then they've been quiet. Somehow control has been gotten over it. It hasn't gone much further. I'm speaking about my local area. I know that this has happened for a fact a number of times here, just in my local town. So these aren't what we're seeing on the wider level. I can see how they've played out this weekend. If I'm aware of incidents like that have happened, now on the back of it, what will have happened is in the areas where these incidents have happened probably multiple times, and they have the largest collection of some of the worst type of these offenders. So like perhaps I've seen today in Rotherham, there was a particularly large gathering. And again, for the British security services who might listen to this, I'm not excusing it and I'm not condoning it. I'm trying to understand how they've happened. But so like we saw today in Rotherham, a very large gathering that descended really they besieged a Holiday Inn, a huge hotel in Rotherham, and the riot police had to prevent them from torching it to the ground, essentially. They tried. They set it on fire. So I can imagine that this has happened because there's been multiple incidents at that place, and there's been multiple turnouts that in the past have been quelled and haven't gone anywhere over the last 5 years. And now, in response to this stabbing that happened, and the rising up in other areas, everybody's turned out because they've done it before. They've been there before. It's not so unfamiliar to them, but more people turned out, and then they saw more people going, and it all it culminated in something that isn't so out of the ordinary in a way. Am I making any sense?
Yes. No, you make very, very strong sense. I suspect that, 20, 30, 50, 60% of the British public thinks that these rioters are patriots.
I don't think, in a way, I don't think anybody likes, nobody in the UK likes to see violence. Okay. So, but whilst they don't like it, I mean, in a way, you can understand. You can have the understanding you can have the understanding that in order for something to get done, a few eggs have to get broken. That's the only like idiom I can think of here, Luke, that kind of explains it. And one of the interesting things has been to see a lot of like the distant right, like Academic Agent and these people who effectively, like on a low level, are effectively like every day of their life, like calling for some kind of revolution in the UK. You know, they deny it, that that's what they're doing, whilst, you know, seeking their own grift to grift on people's discontent. But really, this is like what they're doing. But like the first sign of it happening, they're like, oh, this isn't what I wanted. And like my response to that is, well, of course it isn't, but how did you expect it to play out? I mean, if what you are doing is you are farming in many ways the legitimate discontentment of people, then how are you expecting it to play out? It's going to play out in a messy way when it happens, and it's not going to be, nobody's going to come to like Academic Agent and say, oh, I've heard, you know, your streams on Evola, and would you like, you know, we'd like you to take over now, sir, or anything like this. It's going to play out in a very messy way with like violent thugs who start breaking things. I mean, it's always going to end up like this. And lots of people who get derided for other legitimate reasons, like, what's his name? Douglas...
Murray.
It's people like him have been warning, like, that thing, you know, we're coming to a precipice here in the UK. And, you know, and it's going to get messy unless the government acknowledges that we're coming to these like precipice, and it's going to end up messy. That's all I can say.
No, the way society is organized right now, you cannot, if you've got anything to lose, support, you know, anti-immigration without having your life ruined. Therefore, only people with nothing to lose are going to support anti-immigration. Therefore, you can't expect them to have the same level of discipline that you would have if supporting anti-immigration was more socially acceptable. So by ruling it out from the beginning that supporting a substantial increase in stopping immigration, by ruling that out of polite society, by definition, you're only going to have impolite people pushing this agenda.
Yeah. You ostracize the people and you create a large fraction of society who feel that they aren't being listened to. I mean, isn't this the beauty, Luke, of like liberal politics, that it makes people feel that they're heard. So, it shouldn't come to this. There should be this sense that people have representation, and these kinds of events happen when communities boil up to the point where they feel utterly unrepresented, that they're not heard, and what's more, they are oppressed in a way that's different to the other class of people who are being brought into the country and given welfare, given benefits and police protections. Like one of the stark things I've told you, that there's this feeling that there's a two-tier police system, and there's this hashtag trending, two-tier Kia. One of the things that the Labour government has done since coming in is that they've warned everybody effectively that they're going to put their taxes up. So they've declared they've found a £22 billion black hole in the budget. So they've warned everybody in October they're going to basically be putting everybody's taxes up. And they've taken away from old people in the winter this, what is known as a winter fuel allowance. Basically, every old person in the country usually gets, I think it's like £300 or £400 directly into their bank accounts sometime around Christmas, because old people used to be afraid of putting on the heating in winter and would die. So they wouldn't pay for their heating. So now, for years, the government has been giving old people... Well, the Labour Party taking this away. So in the couple of weeks of coming into office, they've announced that they're basically putting your taxes up, and they're taking winter fuel payments away from old people. But today they've announced emergency funding, that they have millions of pounds available to fund emergency security for mosques in the country. So this is only pouring fuel onto the fire of these people who already believe, they already have these opinions. These are normie people. They're largely NPCs, you might call them, average person on the street, who believe like that they are in poverty and the government doesn't care about them, that they're not represented in Parliament, that the government has forgotten about them, particularly in the North. There's always been the North-South divide, that believe that like there's a different class of politician in Westminster who doesn't care about the North. That they're unheard, and now that they're like giving favours to the foreigners who they're housing in hotels, and like their communities, their high streets are being turned over to. So high streets are being turned into like Islamic centres, literally and figuratively. Like churches are turning into mosques. Civic centres are being turned into like Islamic centres and education centres where all they do is teach a little bit of English and how to get benefits. Hotels, again, have turned into like freely holding asylum seekers. There's all these issues that local people feel like they are really against the government, and the government has just said, we're not giving you your winter fuel money, but we do have the money to give to the mosques. So
yeah, this is a fascinating story. I wonder how much X plays a role here, because X would not be nearly as wide open if Elon Musk didn't buy it. Now you have a considerable free speech on X, and my timeline is 100% in favor of these, or at least sympathetic to the rioters, if not to the exact nature of everything they're doing.
Yeah. I think it does have a part. Now, to be like absolutely kind of aware of what's going on. I mean, I think we also have to ask ourselves, what am I trying to say? I'm also aware that when things like riots in the UK happen, okay, that foreign interests, for instance, probably have an interest in stoking these things up. That disrupting like the good working order of the United Kingdom is also in the interest of foreign entities. For instance, groups, I'm sure, like in Russia or Iran or wherever, China, I'm sure have an interest in destabilizing the UK. And so I'm fully aware that whilst like this stuff goes on, that it's being whipped up by accounts. Like there's lots of misinformation that's gone around at the same time. Initially, perhaps like the riots, the discontent in the country was whipped up by potentially some either Russian-backed or I forget what it is, some foreign-linked accounts that were dropping a Muslim name out there. For 3 days, we didn't know who had slaughtered these girls. Okay, because the police wouldn't release the name, and one of these accounts it's either Visegrad or something, one of them that's linked to some foreign state actor, initially put out a name that was a Muslim name. And so I'm aware that this goes on. But so what I'm trying to say is this is like a problem with opening up something like X. And I'm aware that the government sees this issue, and they're right about the problematic nature of this in like an orderly society. They look at this kind of thing and they say we can't have just like random, like which are effectively foreign agents able to whip up like public disorder through the issuance of disinformation in moments of crisis, like probably just happened. And so there's an argument for something not being so open as X. I'm aware that it's a benefit and it's a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It is nice for those of us on the right to be able to have a huge amount of free expression that's available on X with all the downsides. It's overwhelmingly, I think, a blessing, because you see examples of reality that are going to pierce through the lies that are promoted by the media and by the elites.
Yeah. That being said, I don't know how many normal people are even on X, to be honest though, Luke. It really is. I mean, I don't think they like to admit it, but I think it really used to be the platform of the shit libs. Okay.
Yes.
Bad term, but it really was that. They loved it. It was their platform, and because all the right-wing discourse got removed from it, obviously it came back, but like the normie, it didn't really penetrate to the normie. The normie talks on Facebook. The Zoomers are on Snapchat and TikTok. Not even YouTube, largely. So I think it still remains, actually, X does remain detached. So you can think, if you're on X, like that you have a real clear picture of discourse in the world, and you can think, wow, I follow a range of like moderate accounts here, and I'm getting this picture, this unified picture. Therefore, I'm seeing the truth. But you might not actually be. I don't think the normie's on X yet.
Right, but it's the best place for following these riots. If they're important to you, X is the best place to be.
Yes, it certainly is. It's certainly the one for seeing the truth of the news. Absolutely. I mean, lots of the live streams are still done on TikTok or on YouTube, but X is where the news is. But you also get like these accounts. I think the term that's going around for them are slop accounts. You'll know that the ones that are slop accounts, like End Wokeness and even like Libs of TikTok, who are just invested in just posting like discontentment propaganda. Even if it's true, that what they're posting is true. So nobody's saying that they're making it up.
There's no First Amendment protection in the United Kingdom.
No, there's not. But that's not the point I'm making. I'm saying that there's these slop accounts who basically farm discontentment, and so whilst it may be true, it may not be an accurate picture as to exactly what's going on. I think that's what I'm saying.
Definitely. The point is that following the New York Times and the BBC is not necessarily an accurate picture either.
No. Yeah, you see everything in real time. I think you have to be really careful about who you are following on X. Like I say, my feeds are probably a lot less reliable than your feeds. Let's admit that much. I probably follow a lot of accounts who are less reliable sources and are more likely to feed me a diet of discontentment propaganda, because that's like in their interest. Like when riots kick off, their accounts that like want to tell me to get out on the streets and this kind of thing, versus people being moderate about the situation. And that is, that's a choice about who you follow.
Yeah, but even I try to be pretty use good judgment in who I follow, but even who I'm following, virtually 100% express varying degrees of sympathy and empathy for the rioters.
Yeah, and this is again why I say there's something going on. To use Nigel Farage's phrase from the election, something is going on out there. Something is happening out there, because this is just in stark contrast to the government, who is absolutely like they're thick-eared, and they're putting their fingers in their ears and going la 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 la. You are bad people. You are sick people, and we're going to crush you. So, yeah, we'll have to see how this plays out. Anyway, Luke, I'm going to have to run.
Yep.
But I'm glad to bring you up to speed. Thanks for having me.
Great to talk to you.
All right.
Cheers,
Later.
mate. Cheers. Okay, this is Times Radio, a production of Times of London.
We're taking at the moment, which is to say to those people who engage in this
Right, this is the United Kingdom policing minister.
Criminal activity on our street, that they will be held accountable, is to deter them
But
and
it's not
others
working,
from
is it?
doing this anymore.
It's
Well,
not working, is it? Because we had a
this is the
situation
last-
where there was a meeting with the police chiefs. We then had the press conference, and since then we've had riots and disorder in 9 cities up and down the country. Respectfully, I completely see where you're coming from, but it's not working, is it?
Well, can I just say, this has all happened in the last few days. So we need to now take stock over the next day or so. We need to see what happens today. We will, of course, be meeting on Monday. We will need to see what the picture is, what the intelligence picture is. We need to look at the actual information available to make decisions about how we best then proceed. But at the moment, our focus is on dealing with these criminals, arresting them, getting them into court, into remand if necessary, but dealing with them first and foremost.
Minister, 4 weeks in, have you lost control of the country?
No, look, we've had a really tragic week, starting with that awful incident in Southport on Monday. We've had some public order disorder this week, and that's clearly causing lots of concern around the country. Can I just also say, I think the police who've had to deal with what happened in Southport on Monday and then deal with this public disorder during the rest of the week have done a remarkable job, and I want to pay tribute to those officers. And I also want to say that a number of them have been injured in the course of the week, and our thoughts should be really with those officers doing their job, keeping our communities safe, and have found themselves injured.
Is it time? What's the government going to do?
Okay, here's another report.
Far-right
from
protesters
Times Radio.
have stormed the Holiday Inn in Rotherham, South Yorkshire, where asylum seekers and immigrants are housed. Rioters have smashed hotel windows and went inside the hotel after clashing with police at a rally outside the premises.
This afternoon, after ugly scenes developed, and ugly scenes are developing outside a hotel housing asylum seekers in Rotherham, where riot police are trying to contain the crowds. Windows have been smashed and a fire has been started. Police have warned people to stay away from the centre of Middlesbrough, where some taxis have been smashed and businesses closed, and police are trying to disperse crowds in Bolton. More than 100 people have been arrested after demonstrations involving far-right groups descended into disorder in Hull, Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, Stoke-on-Trent, Blackpool and Belfast. Several police officers have been injured. Well, the protests began after 3 young girls were killed in a stabbing attack in Southport last Monday and appear to have been fuelled by misinformation on social media.
Okay, a question in the chat, Luke. Why are the British elite encouraging and subsidizing ever more levels of immigration? So it's not because they hate Britain, right? It's not because they want to hurt the working class. They genuinely believe that this is what's best for the country. They do have some arguments on their side. I'm all for immigration restriction, but they think that they're bringing in needed workers. They think that they are demonstrating Britain's commitment to human rights. So they're not doing this to smash the country, right? They're doing this out of their liberal left worldview that free movement of peoples is a good thing. I disagree with them, but that's where they're coming from.
The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has pledged to give police forces the government's full support to take action against what he described as extremists attempting to sow hate. And the policing minister, Dame Diana Johnson, told Times Radio those...
So if these were Muslim or rioters of colour, right, they wouldn't be called by the elites just trying to sow hate, I suspect, right? There'd be much more sympathy shown for their cause. But because these are white working class rioters, the elite show them very little sympathy.
Causing mayhem and disruption would be punished. Well, let's head first to Liverpool and talk to the city's Lord Mayor, Richard Kemp. Good afternoon to you, Richard.
Good afternoon.
Just explain what happened last night in Liverpool, because it seems as though there were some pretty violent scenes.
Well, there were two things happened in Liverpool yesterday. The first was a very big one in the city centre, and the second one last night was in Walton, a very deprived part of one of the most deprived, if not the most deprived constituencies in the country. There, a group of people turned.
So everybody's standing there that's just watching, that doesn't just go away and leave them on their own to commit their offences. For me, is supporting them, and it's part and parcel of the same group. And hopefully, as we saw from that, or as we heard from that statement, South Yorkshire Police will be taking some significant positive action in the next few days.
And we've also heard, of course, from Merseyside Police saying that now we've broken that news tonight that 3 people have not only been arrested but charged with violent disorder. What does that mean, Graham, violent disorder? And what kind of, you said the law will deal with them, but what kind of, is it custodial sentence?
Absolutely. Violent disorder, Section 2 of the Public Order Act 1986. It's a
Right, live coverage here from CNN News 18. Far-right thugs in violent clashes with police. All right, this is a commentary here on Sky News.
For what they were convicted of, once they were convicted. So once they got convicted at court, they almost like naming and putting the pictures up. So advertising the fact that these people have been convicted of these offences, almost like a reminder to the public that these are the type of individuals you've got in society and what types of offences they're committing. So that might be, policing doesn't tend to advertise convictions.
That's the worrying stuff, isn't it? These are people who live amongst us. I think that's a lot of the community are saying that, the other day we spoke to a librarian in Liverpool who said, I can't believe some of these are my friends. These are the people amongst me who are burning books in a library, who are setting fire to a hotel with people trapped inside it. Just one thing you just said I want to pick up on, Graham. You mentioned that it's the second most serious offence, violent disorder. Rioting would be the first one. Yeah. What's the distinction? Why would they not be charged with rioting?
Basically numbers. I think it's 12 or more. I'd have to look it up again. 12 or more, I think, is Section 1. But if you charge someone with riot and if you declare the fact that this is a riot, I think there's almost like an obligation either on police and crime commissions. I think it used to be the government, but it may have changed. But there's an obligation on the government, society, to maybe recompense people if they suffer damage as a result of a.
So when Joe Biden stepped down and said he wasn't going to run for the Democratic nomination for president, that was unprecedented because we had created a situation where it became overwhelmingly clear to regular people that Joe Biden was not fit for office. And so, too, even if there's no precedent for working class white rioters to create a change in policy, if they are on the side of reality, if the forces that they represent cannot be stopped, then whether the government's on the left or the right, it will have to accede to some of their demands. All right. And so the amount of immigration that the United Kingdom has been absorbing the past 25 years cannot be sustained. That which cannot be sustained will eventually stop. And the process of stopping it may be violent or it may be civil. But if you cannot stop this immigration influx through civil means, eventually people will turn to violent means.
Riots. That's why you very rarely hear either government or society declare that a riot has taken place, because I think there's almost like either an insurance or a financial obligation. Right. But I'd have to read that up again. It's not that often it's happened.
Yeah, I'm asking because I'm sure people at home are saying, why aren't they being charged with rioting, but violent disorder is...
my career goes back to 81 when we had riots. That's when I first experienced it.
We discussed earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So petrol bombs then, first time we'd seen them on the mainland. But we didn't have this type of protective kit for us or the advanced tactics we're now seeing.
You are watching Sky News. We are bringing you the latest pictures from Rotherham, where rioters targeted police and a hotel, trying to set alight as people were trapped inside. We understand from the Home Secretary this was a hotel housing asylum seekers. She called the attack utterly appalling. We understand at least...
Right, so if your concerns are not met through civil means, right, you will turn to appalling means to try to meet them.
10 police officers have been injured by the rioters.
Right, if the police are consistently on the side of your enemy, eventually you will turn against police. Even if you're the most pro-police, pro-law and order bloke around, eventually if the police are continually deployed on behalf of your enemy, then eventually the white working class rioters here will turn against the police.
Throwing projectiles at them, targeting police. And we are keeping an eye on all of these riots and protests throughout the country tonight, in particular Merseyside and Rotherham. Well, just a short while ago, coming up to 5 p.m. this evening, the Prime Minister condemned the violence as far-right thuggery. Let's hear more of what he had to say from Downing Street.
This weekend, be in no doubt those that have participated in this violence will face the full force of the law. The police will be making arrests, individuals will be held on remand, charges will follow, and convictions will follow. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, whether directly or those whipping up this action online and then running away themselves. This is not protest. It is organised, violent thuggery, and it has no place on our streets or online. Right now, there are attacks happening on a hotel in Rotherham, marauding gangs intent on law-breaking, or worse, windows smashed, fire set ablaze, residents and staff in absolute fear. There is no justification, none, for taking this action, and all right-minded people should be condemning this sort of violence. People in this country have a
would
right
argue
to be safe.
that if you
And
Brits had started talking
we've seen
about a
Muslim
lot of
communities
these
targeted.
issues in a more
Attacks
sensible, open and way of acknowledging that these concerns exist around migration and that there are pressures on the systems and that also people feel uncomfortable with rapid change, not necessarily change per se, but the pace of change, you might be in a bit of a different situation.
So then, Liverpool, Bristol, Hull and Belfast, just 4 of the towns or cities where clear-up operations are underway after the most extensive day of riots and violent far-right protests across the UK. Around 90 people were arrested yesterday. Sir Keir Starmer held a call from Chequers with key ministers to discuss the wave of unrest. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, said, "We've been clear, the police have our full backing in taking the strongest possible action against perpetrators, including making sure there are more prosecutors, sufficient prison places, and the court stand ready." Latika, is the government doing enough in response to the violent riots that we've witnessed in the last few days?
Well, they haven't stopped, have they? I mean, if they were doing enough, they would have stopped. Now, that might sound very simplistic because the government and the police are facing a lot of forces here. These groups are clearly rapidly mobilised via social media and messaging apps, which is something that they didn't have necessarily at the same scale and at the same force in the London riots. But I think some early quick arrests and some strong sentences would do wonders at this point in time. And I think that the decision to open the courts 24 hours has been a really good one. Now it needs to be put to use.
Peter?
We're treating the symptoms and not the cause here. There is absolutely no excuse for anything that has happened in these riots. There's absolutely nothing to be condoned. It is all to be condemned. There is no excuse to pick up a brick bottle.
Right, that is the only thing that you're allowed to say if you want to maintain your position in polite society. That doesn't mean that it's true, right? That their concerns were not met through civil means. How long did you expect them to stand mute?
Fired at the police, disrespect the police, or set fire to anything. I'm not going to say a however, but there is a however. And the however is look, there are some people who just want to fight with the police. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about that. Those thugs exist. There are also people who would never dream of doing any of those things that those rioters have done. But they look on those rioters and say, well, maybe they have a point. I don't think they have a point, but there are some people who do, and they believe that they're not being listened to, that there's a disconnection between what some people call the political class in this country, maybe I'm part of it, the establishment, I suppose, and the people who raise legitimate, reasonable concerns, perhaps not the most articulately expressed, about things like immigration.
Right, the articulateness of your expression, the logic presented in your expression, the sterling character of the grammar and the spelling and the punctuation do not equate with how much reality you're conveying, right? Someone may give an inarticulate argument that is far more on the side of reality than the most articulate arguments against reality. And the government and the elite in the United Kingdom have been consistently, as far as immigration, against reality for the past 25 years.
Things like the changing nature of our country. I spoke yesterday. Talk is a very different station to Times, obviously, but yesterday in 3 years, I've never had as much of a response as I did on my show yesterday to people really, really, really angry with Keir Starmer, thinking that he has basically called anybody who disagrees with him racist. I don't think he has, but a lot of people have that impression. There are people calling him two-tier Keir, saying, why have you talked about all the completely correctly calling out the far right and not calling out, for example, not mentioning Leeds, not mentioning the riots there. These are not necessarily my opinions, but they're opinions that I am getting all the time.
Right. He wants to keep his job, so he's being overly careful in what he's saying. Britain does not have the visceral right-wing talk radio that the United States has, and there are many benefits to that, but there are also many drawbacks. And so people don't get to express their hatred of immigration. Right, it gets severely censored in United Kingdom media. Mickey Cowles tweets, the more you think about, more inadequate this Doug Emhoff statement is. It does not acknowledge the pregnancy, right? Doesn't even acknowledge the affair. It just says, I went through some tough times. Right, this woman, this teacher at his kid's school, his affair with her got her fired. And he got her pregnant. He caused her to lose her job. You don't know what happened to the pregnancy. And his response is that he went through some tough times. How is that a response?
And I think there's a lot. If you suppress things, and if you say you can't talk about certain things, or if you say to have concerns about immigration, that makes you racist, well, then that is going to create. If you push it down, if you don't let people ventilate, if you don't have those conversations, if you just call people this horrible word, gammons or whatever, then you're going to get a situation where people are really, really angry. There's no excuse for it. I'm not saying for a second that violence is in any way justified, but we need to think about why this has happened.
Latika, I want to just build on that with some comments we had from Stephen Riker about an hour ago on this programme, who's Professor of Social Psychology at the University of St Andrews, who, sort of building on what Peter was saying, he said that, and having studied the 2011 riots in London that then spread to other cities as well, he said, actually, this is about addressing the problems in people's lives, especially on deprivation, but actually it's about having a dialogue with those people to create a sense of control, that they are involved in decision-making and in making progress. Rather than sort of doing things to people, or indeed for people, you need to do things with people. And if you don't, when you don't, you end up in a situation potentially like this. And then the other bit of that is around the politicians' language, which I'm quite fascinated by. So to describe, for example, riots such as this as mindless is actually not constructive, because these people are acting on beliefs, and while their beliefs may cause action that people then have concerns about and concerns over, they are still beliefs that need to be considered and engaged with.
Yeah, I think what Peter says is absolutely right. Usually he and I are in furious agreement, so no surprises this morning. But I think there's a lot of things that can be true at once. And some of the commentary I've seen, particularly online, particularly from the left, actually really misses this point. Yes, you can have people who are misinformed. Yes, you can have people who hold bigoted views. Yes, you can have people who are just turning up at these riots because it's opportunism. But all the other things can be true and shouldn't be ignored as well. That populism, dissatisfaction, people who are willing and might not have been part of that former mob to turn to violence to make a point, or get caught up in it, or get carried away in a wild moment. Those things don't come from nowhere. And it's also not contained to the UK. And I think one of the surprises people have, or the feelings why it's so shocking when it happens in the UK, is because you guys just traditionally do not do this. We don't see this very often in Britain. We do see it in other countries, and we wouldn't be as surprised if we saw it taking place in other countries. But populism has roots in dissatisfaction. It has roots in systems that don't work or are seen to not be working for a broad mass of people. You don't have to look very far to know that that's a strong feeling within the UK that needs to be listened to, heard and dealt with. Look at the last election. There was a very strong anyone but the major two parties vote there. And a lot of votes went to parties on the fringes. And there's a reason for that. And we do have to look at it. And I think one of the missed opportunities for Keir Starmer and the Labor government so far has been finding a way to say, look, violence is violence, crime is crime, and you are going to be dealt with in the way that we all expect you shall be dealt with. But on the other hand, we all understand that when you voted for change, you wanted to see the system repaired. And I'm here to do that. And here's 5 ways I'm already trying to sort out these issues.
Leticia makes complete sense on this. I want to talk just briefly about Southport, if I can. So there are a lot of people, I'm sure, who are absolutely baffled at why the horrendous killing of those 3 little girls in Southport was, to some people, the spark for this. What on earth has this got to do? Obviously, we know there was disinformation, misinformation. There were things that were completely wrong there. There was a riot in Southport, which nobody in Southport wanted, or very, very few people in Southport wanted. We had actually the mother of one of those girls saying, stop this, just do not do this. So there are, I think, a lot of people who would never dream of being involved in any of this kind of rioting who are absolutely baffled by that. And I'm interested in that, in why, we've had this very, very dramatic week in our island story. I think, actually, news-wise, it has been really, really intense. And I think there is no connection, really, of course, between the act of a madman and a violent person who did this horrible thing and what is happening now. But also there kind of is, weirdly. There shouldn't be, but there are just some people, rightly or wrongly, who say, the heckler, for example, who said, how could this,
Right. We're so used to this kind of thuggery and intimidation and rioting being solely the province of the left that it's somewhat shocking when finally the right fights back after just taking it in the jaw for so many years.
Come on, Keir Starmer, couldn't have this been prevented? Who's next? And there is just this sense that there is a complete disconnection between casting your vote, taking part in the democratic process, and what you get in return. And that's manifested in so many ways. That's paying lots of tax and not being able to get a GP's appointment. That's, school places, housing. That's lots and lots of different things. There is no excuse for this. There is no justification for attacking the police. I'm not condoning it at all. But this is the sort of 0.001% of that real anger that lots of other people feel. They just don't manifest it in this way.
Don't we also have to think about politicians' language and responsibility of it? I mean, Veronica's just got in touch here saying, what about the language of people like Suella Braverman who use the word invasion? For years, we have had right-wing politicians using words about, flooding.
Well, that is precisely how millions of people in the UK experience this dramatic increase in immigration, which is contrary to their interests, right? Every form of life tries to create a niche construction that is most amenable to their own best interests. Why would people not react to this flood of immigration as an invasion?
Nigel Farage's language, and during the whole Brexit referendum, the posters of, the kind of invasion.
Well, judging by the riots, right, this language has understated the rage that people feel about this massive uptick in immigration.
From Europe. Isn't there a sense as well, as much as there needs to be action from the government, and I mean, to be fair, the government has only been in power less than, nearly a month tomorrow. How much action can you actually, yes, you can speak about.
Well, Labour was in government under Tony Blair, and they deliberately upped immigration rates to reduce the chances of Conservatives holding political power, right? Labour is substantially responsible for the vast amount of immigration to the United Kingdom in the past 25 years. So it's understandable why there'd be so much rage at the Labour Party.
Things, but how much action can you bring in a month? But I just wonder as well about the responsibility, Leticia, here, of politicians to rein in their language and think.
Well, the language seems to severely understate the nature of the problem, right? What's more important, civility in language or truth? Sometimes civility is more important, but sometimes truth is more important. If the United Kingdom and its press rules had allowed for more truth in media discussion, perhaps they would be less likely for this kind of violence, right? If people are not allowed to be verbally violent, are they then more likely to be physically violent?
About when you are constantly dripping this idea of an invasion, is there not always going to be a consequence of that?
This rage isn't created by this or that politician talking about invasion, right? This rage is because the real interests of people have been compromised.
Versus reality, isn't it?
I'm going to be very controversial here. I would argue that if you Brits had started talking about a lot of these issues in a more sensible, open and way of acknowledging that these concerns exist around migration and that there are pressures on the systems and that also people feel uncomfortable with rapid change, not necessarily change per se, but the pace of change, you might be in a bit of a different situation. But I think there's a tendency for the British, at least I've observed, and particularly when I was in Australia, that when Australia was having these same conversations, people would look at us and say, well, you're racist because you don't like immigration and you want to control your asylum seeker movements. Now, there was a lot of inflammatory language, and Australia had a very tortured debate about this. But in the end, the entire community came to the point where I think the British...
Well, for decades in Australia, the major parties tacitly agreed not to campaign on the issue of immigration. And that's also largely been true in the United States and many other first world countries. And so that the issue of immigration has largely been removed from the political over the past 80 years in the first world as an overreaction to the Second World War, right? When you neutralize and remove from the political, the pressing nature of immigration, then you can expect that there'll be some kind of eruption.
Public is now at, which is illegal immigration is not okay. There has to be a way that people can come to our country. We know who's coming in and we welcome them when they've come in through a process. But what can't be tolerated is anyone just taking it into their own hands, paying a people smuggler and rocking up on our shores. And so I think the longer you try and suppress those conversations, the more you give it to people who will not be responsible in taking guardianship of that issue and steering it in a way that we can talk about it carefully and considered in a considered manner with the public. And I think that that may be one of the reasons that Britain is having a bit more trouble with this immigration.
Right. And a country can choose to bring in immigrants who are going to bring in, far more to the tax base than they take out in public welfare. But in the United States and in Germany and in the United Kingdom, immigrant communities are overwhelmingly taking out far more in welfare payments than they are contributing to the tax base.
Issue and Europe wider too.
But also in that, within language, when you think about the numbers, what are we, 700,000 people coming into the country, we said, didn't we, in a year, around that? How many of those are illegal migration? How much of that is people coming in small boats? It's a fraction of it. Most of it is legal migration.
I know.
This is why there needs to be a responsibility around language, is all I'm saying, that people need to be armed with the facts. And it is
So the elites, like this radio presenter, are very, very interested in trying to rein in people's language, right? Far more emphasis is placed on civility than on telling the truth. So let's get another perspective here.
Both parties have serially lied, and I use that term advisedly. They have lied about immigration. 2010 manifesto, the Tories promised to cut immigration to the tens of thousands. The same in 2015, 2017. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown's manifestos made promises on immigration, legal immigration, that were consistently violated and in a premeditated way, in my view. That is unsustainable. It creates an endemic distrust in politics. And we have to acknowledge that that is a background context, not for the riots themselves, which are clearly animated by the far right, but for the discontent that has allowed it to spread so rapidly in this country, and that does reflect a disquiet amongst millions of citizens who abhor what is happening on our streets.
In the last 6 days, the town of Southport has witnessed the fatal stabbings of 3 young girls. BB King, aged 6, Elise Dot Stancombe, who was 7, and 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguirre. And then within hours, a ferocious riot outside a mosque, which left more than 50 police officers injured and worshippers fearing for their lives. Sunday Times columnist Matthew Syed spent several days there speaking to local people, and he has written about it for you to read in the paper. It's available right now at thetimes.com with your digital subscription. And Matthew's with us. Hello, Matthew.
Morning.
Good to speak to you. I think, first of all, on your way to Southport, what were you expecting? What were you anticipating?
Well, I think I went there with a sense that it would be obviously a town in tremendous grief, also traumatized by the violence that had unfolded. I suspected that I would feel a sense of gloom and despondency. But I have to say, I spoke to many, many people on the train on the way up, in the town and beyond, and they were united in condemning the violence, in wishing to focus attention on the 3 beautiful young girls who had died, support for the grieving families whose pain and trauma is almost unimaginable,
And I have to say, I left with a tremendous sense of optimism. I do think that we would be wrong to diminish the significance of the riots that have spread from Southport to the rest of the nation. I think it's incorrect, categorically incorrect, to blame it solely on the far right. I think there's something deeper. But I think it's also worth saying that the vast majority of people in this country are appalled by the violence, support the police, and believe that our law enforcers, who I spoke to many of those too, are doing an extraordinary job in difficult circumstances. And it is truly horrific that some of them have been attacked and injured, defending the rule of law, defending property, and defending citizens.
Talk to us about, I suppose, the causes for your optimism, and perhaps the wall is the primary reason.
Yeah, so the wall on the corner of St. Luke's Road and Sussex Road is...
Okay, here are some perspectives on X. Kurt Schleiter. Tweets, this British uprising is going to be crushed, not because it is wrong, it is absolutely right, but because it is disorganized and its insurgents have zero levers of power at their disposal. They're going to persecute the insurgency and the insurgents, just like the January 6 people. They're going to try to use it to totally discredit the anti-alien movement. The British communists are thrilled by this development. Will Chamberlain says, the British right is about to get reamed. We've seen this movie in America before, 4 years ago. January 6 riot, it was a riot at one place. Everyone who participated had their lives ruined. This is going to happen tenfold in Britain. Keir Starmer is far more competent than Joe Biden. He's younger than Biden, and he is the UK equivalent of the Attorney General. I get the grievances of the British right, unless you are prepared to overthrow the government by force and install Nigel Farage as Franco. The only long-term consequences of these riots will be the jailing and bankruptcy of those who participate and a general delegitimization of right-wing anti-immigration politics in Britain. Yes, you are a second-class citizen in the country of your birth. That sucks.
Is where the mosque that was attacked so dreadfully. It's like on a corner, I guess a thigh-high red brick wall that really bore the brunt of a lot of the violence. And people will have seen the images of the charring and the scarred facade. But on Wednesday, people came out to rebuild the wall. And I start, thank you. I mean, I see why you mentioned this, because I start the piece that I've written on this wall, because walls have become something of a metaphor for a divided world. Trump built a wall, of course, tried to build a wall on the southern border. Theorists call it digital.
You can only have civilization with a wall. Either the wall's going to be natural or you're going to put up a wall. Otherwise, anything advanced that's built, right, outside is going to try to come in and take advantage.
Walls on the social media that divide up the echo chambers. But this wall, people came out to rebuild, giving their time pro bono, not just to clean up the streets, but to rebuild the wall and to help the people who work in the mosque, 6 of whom had been trapped in there, barricaded in on the Tuesday night. So I think that, I hope it remains a lasting cultural metaphor of the solid decency of most of the British people. I hope you're hearing me okay. I hope the signal's okay.
Oh, yeah, loud and clear, Matthew. Yeah, do continue.
Great. Yeah, no, forgive me. We've had a few problems in Southwest London. Yeah, I spoke to the Imam at the mosque, the chairman of the mosque. It was a fascinating conversation, because you can imagine the terror that you're in this sleepy town. I think is probably wrong. It's a quiet seaside town, but you know, they have the occasional stag weekends. You know, it's got a buzz and a vibe and a wonderful subculture there too. But the chairman of the mosque was saying to me, you know, fear, wondering what on earth had happened. You know, the rule of law is so deeply embedded in this country that you don't expect to be sitting on the corner of a relatively quiet suburb of Southport, fearing for your life. But he said that his abiding memory of this period will not be fear, but kindness. And I asked him to describe Southport, and he just said it's a beautiful community. He's lived there for 20 years, had no problem.
Look, kindness is wonderful in certain situations. Cruelty is wonderful in other situations. There's nothing inherently superior about love or kindness, right? It has to be appropriate to the situation. The idea that kindness is always the response is insane.
Weak.
It has been a turn.
I
busy.
mean, I know they say when it rains it pours, but, you know, if they could just spread it out, it wouldn't be too bad.
Well, exactly right. Well, let's talk about what we're calling Tinderbox Britain. You know, we've had some reactions from our audience in the past to big stuff.
So Britain has never had the openness and the freedom and the free speech of American conservative talk radio, but you do have the rise of more free speech online now. Various online channels such as TalkTV in the UK playing an excerpt from Kevin O'Sullivan's show.
stories, but I've never seen anything like this. And what it is you know, after the Southport riots, you know, him and Yvette Cooper went up to sort of pay their respects and lay down flowers and all that. It seemed rather.
And Stephen J. James notes they keep calling it far-right riots, but Stephen says they just look like normies to me.
The perfunctory. People were saying, you in, out, you're out of there.
Yeah,
aren't
I think
you?
he was there for like 2 minutes.
Yeah, isn't this terrible? Somebody heckled him, he didn't even talk to them, and off he went. Then they came back down and they did their sort of standard issue speeches in the Commons. Oh, this is horrific and terrible, isn't that? Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Of course, we all agree with that. But they seemed to be just going through the political motions.
It really did feel like that.
And I think people noticed that. Then there was the Southport riot. I was on air as it erupted. We were seeing it live, as it were. Then, oh boy, did Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper's attitude seemed to change. Suddenly, as I said, they had their pantomime villain.
Right, looking at more comments from Stephen J. James. Talked to some guys on the ground in one of the rioting areas. They tell me this is not far right. There are no far right groups involved. It's just normies. The people are rioting, the types who would say they are not racist while chanting outside the immigration center, hoping for some relief from the avalanche of immigration that has overwhelmed Great Britain.
And all their fury was directed not to a country that seems to be unraveling, but to far-right thugs. No one's condoning what those rioters did in Southport, but if this pair of people, our Home Secretary and our Prime Minister, if they are going to really end up thinking that the reason for all the disturbances around the country is just down to what they call travelling far-right thugs, they're delusional. Either they're delusional or they're making this up. They're doing this deliberately to deflect from an uncomfortable truth that they can do nothing about. Before you and I discuss this, Pete, let's remind ourselves of the speech, was it 2 nights ago that enraged the nation. Here he is.
So where was the last right-wing rioting like this? The closest example I can think of is January 6th, and then a small mini riot that broke out during the year 2000 recount in Florida in the fall of 2000.
Is our dear Labour leader standing before Union Jack flags, giving his reasons for what went wrong in Southport. Take it away, Keir.
I will take every step that's necessary to keep you safe. And that's why I said what I said about mosques being...
Well, if safety is a prime concern, you'd want to stop immigration, right? The introduction of foreigners in overwhelming numbers is going to make ordinary Brits feel unsafe.
Attacked because they're mosques. The far right is showing who they are. We have to show who we are in response to that.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, the news media and British elites calling these rioters far right. Many of them might just be normies.
And that's why we pulled together this response this afternoon to try and coordinate and make sure that as we face the next few days and weeks, we have the strongest possible response in order to ensure that there is safety for all of our citizens, including those Muslims who will see, as you rightly say, attack.
It might not be inevitable that these rioters simply get crushed. It might be that they represent forces so powerful that the ruling elite will have to make, in effect, some sort of accommodation with them.
On their mosques because they're mosques. Thank you.
Thank you, Keir. Fantastic stuff. You really struck a chord with the nation there. Everybody is furious. Now, have a look at this, Pete. You're going to love this. This is Yvette Cooper. This is first off, this is her reacting to, I think, what happened in Leeds, followed by her reaction to what happened in Southport. Now, you remember the Leeds, I think you and I were on the show when it actually happened, when it exploded.
So during the French Revolution, right, initial reports were that the revolutionaries were simply going to get crushed. Well, in the end, the revolutionaries won. I'm sure when the Bolshevik revolutionaries were trying to take over Russia, there were many initial reports that they were simply going to get crushed. Well, sometimes the revolutionaries win.
Air Hills area, and now that was largely a ethnic riot. You know, we heard about Gypsy Romers. We heard about.
Right, at a certain point, or the denunciation of racist and far right, if it's inapplicable, right, it's not going to have the same power that those denunciations used to have, right? after a certain amount of time, when terms get misused, they lose their power, and more people are going to be willing to stand up to being called racist and far right.
Muslims up there, it was an ethic right now. You know, we know what happened there. The police just sort of buggered off and let it happen. They just go, you get on with it. We won't arrest anyone here. Now, the riot, as I say, no one is condoning it in Southport, was, of course, pretty much white working class males. So have a look at the differing attitudes, the differing facial expressions of Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Well, I've been talking to West Yorkshire police officers and also local community leaders about the action they're now taking in response to those unacceptable scenes of disorder and criminality that we saw last night. The community is working very closely together in response to
what if government policy and immigration levels are what is unacceptable and thus fueling a reaction?
What was a local child protection incident, but it's really important that the community can feel safe on the street.
The stabbing to death of 3 young girls is a local child protection incident?
So appalling to now see those same police facing violent attacks from thugs on the streets who have no respect for a grieving community. It's a total disgrace. Frankly, this is a time when everyone should be showing respect for a community and for the police.
So I can't think of any examples. We don't have any examples in history of the majority of a country happily resigning themselves to becoming the minority and having their country taken over by foreigners, right? We have no examples in history of this happening, right? The only examples that we have that even approximate that are of a violent reaction.
Spot the difference. It's extraordinary.
That is absolutely extraordinary. And the irony of that woman talking about respecting a community after just her entire behaviour since she became Home Secretary, I think is absolutely disgraceful. I think we need to remember that the reason all of this started was because 3 kids were killed by a radical knife man.
Yeah,
right. If it becomes socially acceptable to put stopping immigration as your top political priority, right, more and more elites are going to come to that side.
That story has just disappeared out of all of this, and we have to get back to it. Obviously, we have to deal with riots and all the rest of it, but at the heart of this, there's 3 dead kids in a community that were taken away far too young, and it is...
Right. How many of these rioters are Labour voters? All right? It wouldn't surprise me if close to half of these rioters were Labour voters. I don't think that they are primarily inspired by ideology or by the rhetoric of politicians. This is very much a visceral working class reaction.
Just shocking to hear somebody like Yvette Cooper. Like you said, they were given the gift of the perfect villain, the perfect excuse, so they don't have to take responsibility for an environment that they helped create of a soft touch for one and a hard touch on the other. It is absolutely undeniable.
Glib Medley back to the show. And Glib, what's going on, man?
Can you hear me, Luke?
I can, loud and clear, sir. And soon the whole world will hear you.
No, I just thought I'd check in, see if the StreamYard thing would actually work. I've actually got a Wi-Fi connection. I'm out here in, well, it's actually kind of drizzling out here.
Are there any riots? Any riots going on, bro?
No, it's pretty peaceful in Brooklyn. You just stay out of the bad neighborhoods. You'll be okay.
Oh, thank God. So peace and love is returning to New York City.
Yeah, all that subway crime, it's overstated. Millions of people use that thing every day. You hear about a few incidents. What is it?
Yeah, it certainly, well, it grabs attention. I mean, I have people who've talked to me about, oh, you got to, stay as far away from the tracks as you can in case some mentally ill person shoves you down. But have you noticed a decrease in crime in New York City in the last year, or is it staying the same?
Well, I've taken the subway a lot in the last year, and it seems like now that COVID has died down, the number of crazies has died down too in the subway. On the street, you're getting the effects of the illegal immigration. That's a bigger problem right now than the homeless crazies. But lots of rats too. That would be the number one focus.
Who was that guy? I think he was a Marine or whatever who choked out a raving lunatic. And
Yes,
now
Penny was his name.
now charged with murder. Would he have majority support in New York City?
I believe so, yeah, certainly among the white population. If you talk to the older white ladies about it, they've read the backstory. And they don't say it in so many words, but they all think he's a hero. As for the minority communities, they should, well, there were eyewitnesses on the train, and I guess they'll speak at the trial, but there were eyewitnesses of minority persuasions who are 100% behind his actions. So it should be an interesting trial. I guess it'll take place after the election. Should be a nice rebuke to the DA, who's deserving of one after the Trump trial.
So are you optimistic about the direction for the quality of life in New York City?
Oh dear. Well, it still seems to be a magnet for talent. So yeah, I guess short term, and all there is short term.
We're going to begin with a high-profile.
Yeah, I would be bullish on New York right now, as much as any place in this country.
And how does one stay safe as you're navigating New York City on public transport? Are there any tips?
Well, yeah, you do racial profiling. I'm not going to go into details. You know, there's a new law in New York where they're monitoring for hate speech now and for hate messages on social media. So we got a whole force there to work with. But yeah, use your imagination. You use street smarts. You know, you use age, you use sex, you use, you know, how people are carrying themselves. And yeah, for the most part, I've been okay. I did used to go to this reservoir. I live in a neighborhood that's less than 2%. Well, it's an old reference. Failed penalty kicker. Less than 2% of that. But if then there's a cemetery and a reservoir and a park in between me and my neighborhood and a dicey one. And I had one or two incidents there that were dicey that I managed to get away. And I learned my lesson, you know, I don't go to that neighborhood so much anymore. I'm an older white guy. They're going to, you know, prey upon me. So you just use your judgment, you know. You wall off one area, there's always good neighborhoods to go to. So, but it was a nice reservoir, quiet area, a veritable wetland, just a short subway ride from Manhattan. So there you go.
How much homeless are there in New York City? Because isn't there a right to shelter legislation in place?
Yeah, some neighborhoods get hit bad with it. If they got some crummy hotel in the outer borough, they wind up becoming a shelter. You know, the hotels make a ton of money off them, and the illegals, like, you know, they can charge $600 a night. And people protest, you know, these things will go up next to schools and whatnot. Again, I'm in a nice neighborhood. It's like landmarked. There are only so many tall buildings, and there are nothing that's shelter worthy. So we got one resident homeless guy who lives by the train, and he's harmless. So you get him on the subway, you know, that would be a disturbance. So like one in every 10 subway rides, a homeless guy will pass through. That's actually, but somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 rides, you get a homeless guy walking through, and they're usually unthreatening.
And what about skipping the fare? Is that still rampant?
Yeah, it's definitely doable. You'll see hipsters doing it, as well as you know, the demographics that you would expect. And it's something that came in with COVID, and I'm seeing more enforcement now. I saw a white guy in a subway station who definitely got pulled over for it. But you know, it's part of the spirit of how we approach crime these days, and these things are cyclical, and eventually law enforcement will bite back because the people will demand it.
And what have you noticed among Jews getting red-pilled since the October 7 attack?
I don't think they're there yet. I don't think, certainly, well, I'm thinking more along the lines of where they are with Trump. I'm jumping ahead, and yeah, I think it's suffered a lot of people, but I think liberal Jews are still holding out for something good to come along somehow.
And are there certain ways that you delicately try to figure out if someone's red pilled? Do you make a sentiment about we our streets aren't safe, or we got too much immigration, or how do you bring up, say, red pill topics, if you do at all, with people you don't know well?
Right, the people I don't know well. Well, yeah, I deal with older people mostly, in the line I'm in, older Jews mostly, actually, and well, it's interesting. Yeah, there's certain population. It just kind of slides into conversation. How does it come up? It usually does not come up. I let them bring it up. I'll say, boy, it's pretty crazy out there. If something big like the Daniel Penny thing happens, and actually, I did specifically ask about that because it was right after my run-in with the crime element in my earlier anecdote, and so I brought it up with her, and that's when I got her opinion that Daniel Penny was a hero, and there's just, I think it's as much problem people are having at Israel is that they're having with the all the non-binary stuff, all of the alphabet stuff. I think is rubbing a lot of older Jews the wrong way. So it's a mix of things.
Have you noticed an increase in transgender identifying people?
Yeah, there's been an uptick, I think. Mostly guys in their 20s, poor things, these Gen Z guys. Mostly that. I don't see really too many trans men, just non-binary types, maybe.
How much do you listen to the radio? And if so, what do you listen to?
Not at all. As I told you, I go on long walks now, and I usually don't listen to anything, but the news has been such that I have been listening to your streams while I'm walking. And but not a lot else.
So there are no radio personalities who you find compelling that you make an effort to listen to?
That's correct. I'm strictly a YouTube guy, the odd podcast. I was a heavy talk radio listener, but I listened to the radio back when I was in the country, because there were some good local stations, but those weren't talk. It was mostly music. And when I moved back to the city 10 years ago, the radio just wasn't a part of the scene. I bought a nice clock radio, a table radio. It's for nothing. It's a paperweight.
And tell me about any podcasts or YouTube shows that you like.
Well, I was just thinking that one time I actually did listen to the radio was early in COVID. And so that was about it. And then I kept listening. And it just seemed like more and more propaganda. And then I went back to it like not maybe a year or two ago. And they were still talking about COVID in their public service ads. And it just everything seemed so irrelevant at that point. I'm sorry, what was your latest question?
Your favorite podcasts?
I could name them, but the funny thing is, a lot of them are the ones that put me to sleep. So I'd rather not say, out of deference to, good taste. But I'm not really listening. I mean, I'm in the contemplative state right now. I joined a new yoga studio. I'm doing very advanced stuff there. I just got out of a class, and I'm walking about 5 or 6 miles a day on average. I got these barefoot shoes. I'm an evangelist for barefoot shoes right now. and I should get sponsorship. That's why I go on the Luke Ford show, so I can get some exposure. Maybe there's a free pair of shoes in this at the end of it.
How often do you become incandescent with rage?
Yeah, if the subway is held up, the subway service got bad toward the end of the last heat wave or the one before that, and I was swearing a lot on the platform. But other than that, everything's pretty cool, you know. Keep a cool head at work, you know. It's all good. My anger is managed.
When did you notice that, to the best of your memory, that Joe Biden was displaying some signs of senility?
Oh, that would seem to be before the election, right? Before 20. Yeah, I would say then. Yeah,
and
so
so
it was coming up as a.
How do you understand it? Because conservatives, before Biden was elected president, conservatives were almost universally pointing out that this man displays senility. And yet the mainstream media didn't come along to this point of view until June 27th, after Biden's disastrous debate. And then they completely switched on the topic. So for 4 years, they said it's inaccurate and fake news to say that Joe Biden is senile. And then they just completely switched and essentially drove him out of running again. How do you understand what happened there?
Well, that's a lot there. Well, I think liberal media is such a walled-off bubble right now. Self-reinforcing claims, they create their own mythology. And it really is at the level of mythology. As we pointed out, people on the left are more likely to view politics as a deeply religious, quasi-religious endeavor. So I would explain it that way, lost in a bubble, and with the power to hold captive enough of the American people that the Democrats can ride on. And they're riding on now with the, with the coronation of the great one, Kamala.
Yeah, you excited for Kamala?
I haven't seen much buzz for her here in the city. I've seen some Trump stuff go up, but nothing Kamala worthy so far. I think people are still waiting to see if it's actually real, huh?
Do you find her physically attractive? Because I think she's a good-looking woman.
Yeah, for 59. Yeah. She's a fine-looking 59-year-old, sure.
No, she's aged very well. I mean, she's got a great figure. I love her long hair. She's got a beautiful smile. I think she's quite attractive.
If she puts the effort she puts into her body into intellectual endeavors, she'd be a force to be reckoned with. But as it is, she can only be carried by the willfulness of the media to keep her. I don't know what do you call this? It's not a. Is it a Rose Garden campaign? What? She's not in the Rose Garden.
It's entirely scripted. So I'm sure there are many ways you can put it. I would say it's entirely scripted so far. How do you think she's dealing with these revelations about her? I mean, she already knew that her husband previously had an affair, and may well have paid a woman off. She got pregnant, and apparently this has been quite disruptive to her campaign, and she has not publicly announced any support for her husband. How do you think she's enjoying the embarrassment that these revelations have brought her?
Well, maybe she knows of worse ones that are coming along, but she's playing it like she's playing everything else, huh? Just walking by, sweeping it under, got the media to keep it swept under, and wait for something to fall back in Trump land.
What do you think about the taken for granted, matter-of-fact discussion that the Democrats are having, that it may be impossible to have a Jew as vice president because Democrats, by and large, have too much animosity towards Jews to go along with a Jewish vice president? And this is just discussed in a matter-of-fact way, while if the same sort of situation was going on among Republicans, there would be outrage.
But isn't that standard? What are we? We're doing this. Dems are the real anti-Semites.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I guess they are. You know, they got the Muslim faction, they've got the Antifa faction. So it was about time they'd have to own it. And this selection process would appear to be something they're going to reckon with. You think they're going to go with Shapiro?
I think so, but it is striking how it's discussed in a completely matter-of-fact manner, whether or not there's just too much animosity towards Jews for a Jew to be vice president.
Yeah, it is kind of funny, considering how much of the coalition is, and the money that the DNC gets is derived from Jewish sources. It's one of the fun conundrums of the 2024 election. Gotta love this condensed cycle, huh?
Yeah, it's exciting. How did you arrive at this place of awareness rather than judgment, this inner calm that you exude rather than outrage? Did it require a lot of effort on your part?
It was probably just getting rid of a television, radio, and getting older. Not having the hormones for anger, you know. And, you know, if you want to be perpetually, I mean, there are a lot of people who are older who are perpetually angry, you know, it's their force, it's their energy, it's, you know, it's what sustains them, but that's not me.
How are you affected by COVID, by the unprecedented removal of basic rights that Americans take for granted, such as...
I don't really like to talk about COVID with you, Luke. Yeah, I'd rather avoid that subject with you.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to hear your point of view without pushing back too much.
Yeah, that's still a touchy one. Yeah, I'd rather, just...
Okay,
I got my shot. I'm ready to move on.
Okay. What do you notice about anti-Semitism in New York City? Are violent anti-Jewish attacks really primarily just a function of non-white on white attacks?
Oh, completely. Yeah. Yeah, that's a one-word answer. Yeah. Of course, more prevalent among Muslims, but you're not going to see Antifa randomly attack a Jew on the street, you know, no matter what color their hair, how many piercings they've got, how many nasty tattoos. They're not going to do it, you know. They're going to protest a business. I've been inside a business that got protested by Antifa. They were on a march, and that was the first place they hit because people who owned the coffee shop were apparently real estate developers who were Zionist, and they might have even been Israeli, but the worst thing was they were developers. What they've done, the person who organizes the anti-Zionist stuff here is, she originally got to start doing anti-landlord stuff, housing rights, tenant rights activists. So she combines gentrification, the cause of anti-gentrification with anti-colonialism. For a nice, neat trick, you know? You can bring in more people that way. She gets some Spanish people in that way.
What newspapers, if any, do you read regularly?
None. I just listen, you know? I'm in a coffee shop right now. In this coffee shop a few months back, I was listening to these queer guys. It's a good coffee shop because it's a mix of artists and musicians, and but it's on this industrial strip, so you got these just working class guys coming in too. But these gay guys were talking. This one guy was really going on. It said in a very flowery fashion. But anyway, he was telling the other guy that, yeah, it's true. There are these billionaires and groups like the Kaiser Foundation that are funding guys like us to move to places like Tulsa and be subsidized there, get their housing and employment, and, you know, get set up with a job, and basically feed blue culture in red states. You're not going to hear that in the Times. You're going to hear it in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. I know he's not bullshitting.
Yeah, it's
I've heard it other
interesting
places.
that abstaining from reading newspapers does not seem to dramatically decrease your quality of life.
Yeah, you need a weather forecast. That's basically it.
Yeah. And how about your consumption of books? Has being on social media reduced your consumption of books?
Oh, totally. But getting back on the subway, believe it or not, has brought it back somewhat. And I even read at coffee shops now. I just finished Turgenev, Russian author. I suppose it's a play, but it didn't get performed too much. It's called A Month in the Country. And I can't really recommend it, but it's just, a lot of times I'm just reading for atmosphere. I like the atmosphere of prose. And it's a better thing to read on the subway than your phone. You don't want to doom scroll on the subway if you can avoid it. But sometimes there's some guy yapping, because they're too cheap to buy AirPods and their phone doesn't have a jack. So
oh, that's so obnoxious. I hate that.
disturbed.
The low IQ people can't figure out Bluetooth.
Yeah, so then you switch it back over to X Twitter, and you get on with it. But that doesn't happen too often.
How often do you get into conversations on the subway?
Not often on the subway, but you can still get the nice random encounters on the street that make city life more appealing. Yeah. But not on the subway. You keep to yourself on the subway. The last time I had a conversation, it was a very, very crowded subway, and a rare one because it didn't have any air conditioning, and there was a lady with her toddler in a stroller, and I told her at the end of a short ride where we were able to get out, get some air, that was a good kid you got there. Short conversation because I had to do a little bit of yoga work to squeeze around it, and the kid only kicked me once. And I told her, that's a good kid, only kicked me once. So, But that was about it. Just giving encouragement to flustered mother.
How do you understand the fall of the alt-right? What do you think happened to that movement?
Didn't have quality leadership, right?
Yeah.
A lot of egos, not a whole lot of leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Go ahead.
I just said directionless, yeah, without the leadership, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how some people were able to be interested in its development without blowing up their lives. And then for other people, they could not handle the red pill, and they'd quit a $120,000 job if they just read Kevin McDonald's Culture of Critique and blow up everything that they'd worked hard to build.
Those are pretty extreme cases, huh? Yeah, but how prevalent are they? Well, I can't even remember that guy's name. Is he still around?
Paul Little, I think.
Ah, yes. I remember the little part.
And
no,
go ahead.
I can't. It was very tantalizing at the time, right? And people were fired up by it. Certain people got too deep in the water, right? They didn't have the psychological profile to carry on with it.
Do you notice many attractive young women on the subways?
Oh, no, people have gotten uglier. They dress uglier. 20 years ago, people look a lot better than they do now. You see these, what are they called? Flash tattoos? I mean, it used to be you walked into a bar, you go into the restroom, and you'd see this nasty graffiti on the walls. And I understand Generation Z doesn't go to bars anymore, so to get that aesthetic effect, they put it on their bodies now, that nasty graffiti. And so that's really diminished. But I did notice after the heat wave broke, I said, okay, there's some good looking women on the street now. It must just be because the heat wave broke and I'm feeling things again.
And how easy is it to have conversations with complete strangers? For example, do you know people who pull this off as a regular thing?
I don't know anybody who pulls it off as a regular thing. I don't know those kind of people. You know, I'm an old guy right now. Everybody gets settled in their ways. You don't do too much random stuff. It's just a short conversation. And I like the tourists too. You get a lot of French tourists out here. They like to look at the murals, you know. So, you know, I tell them it's all a hustle, but no, I don't tell them anything. I do little French gestures, though. You know, I moon them. Wasn't that something they did in the opening ceremony?
Probably. I
believe
didn't
it.
watch it. Go ahead.
It was a spiritual mooning, yeah. The opening ceremony.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm about used up on conversation, Luke.
Okay, bro. Great to catch up.
Raining a little harder. It's good to catch up with you. We'll talk again sometime.
Thanks. Sounds good, man. Take care. Glib Medley.
All right.
Take care, bro.
Those riots in Southport and indeed around the country, they are a reaction to what happened, to what that, to those awful deaths and injuries in that dance class. It is still upsetting even to think about it. It's absolutely awful. Poor little kids at a Taylor Swift dance class. I mean, for God's sake, it doesn't bear thinking about. But it's not that in itself that people are protesting about. It is a feeling that, you know, when did this sort of thing start happening in this country? And of course, there was a lot of misinformation because the police tried to keep it all secret, wouldn't tell us who the accused, the suspect was, and wouldn't tell us what religion he was, and then it filtered through. He might be part of a family of Rwandan immigrants, and so on and so forth. It wasn't the protest was partly based on that, partly based on why is this now happening in our country. And as I say, Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper are either deliberately avoiding the central issue, which isn't that just a few far-right thugs are causing trouble, are seizing this opportunity. It is that, although millions of decent law-abiding citizens, of course, would never condone the methods those thugs used in Southport. At the same time, they do agree with the reasons for those protests, and that's what this government must confront. Otherwise, there's no way out of this.
Oh, 100%. And I find it very entertaining to watch the fact that so many other protesters, they get so much nuance. So it's not everybody, it's just a small faction, you know, that are doing the anti-Semitic chants at the Palestinian marches. But this lot, everybody's a thug. I mean, it is very clear from the language and the demeanour that this is done deliberately. It is a clear distraction, and it has to be. We have to continue to call it out because you've got to force the government to confront this. But the reality is they won't confront it because they don't know how to tackle it. Because for too long, people like Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer have pandered to the mob. And let's not forget, Keir Starmer took the knee in front of a riot. Essentially, that's what he did. And once you've done that, the next riot will just walk all over you. He has no authority here anymore. Neither does the police, because again, they spend most of the time driving around in rainbow-coloured police cars. It's ridiculous. You wonder why this stuff happens? It's because of institutional decline. It's these things that hold us together. It's things like Parliament. It's things like the courts and the police and everything else that have just chipped away at trust and lied to us and tried to manipulate us, and we just don't trust anything anymore. And we're living with the consequences.
Okay, so I subscribe to Mark Halperin. He just sent out an email. He's going to do a live show at 3 p.m. Western time. He wants to talk about the vetting process, not of the VP prospects, but of Kamala Harris and her husband, too. The origin of the efforts to stop Josh Shapiro from being on the ticket as Kamala's vice presidential nominee, the latest on the Veep stakes and the Trump campaign, and the latest poll results.
Of that. It is the people trying to protect the liberal institutions that have brought this about us. It is people like Keir Starmer that has brought the riots to the UK.
And, you know, he's quite right. You know, the Muslim community deserve protection. Their mosques should not be attacked. But to actually bring them up in that speech, I think was very unwise of him because, as I say, he's sort of trying to turn this into a sort of small incident. Oh, I'm going to protect you from these far-right thugs. We don't feel threatened by these far-right thugs. I mean, yeah, they'll turn up now and again and throw a few bricks and throw wheelie bins at the cops and get drunk and all. We don't feel threatened by that. We feel threatened by people who go into dance floors and stab kids to death. We feel threatened by potentially what many people feel is the kind of Islamification of this country, and the way that people like Starmer and Cooper kowtow to that community while seemingly despising the community of white working class people.
100% it is the bigotry of low expectations, and it is nothing but snobbery. People like Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper and most of the cabinet really look down on the working class because they don't care about them, and they never have done. I mean, I would love to know how many of the cabinet could actually point to Southport on a map before this happened. I'd love to know that.
And by the way, Keir, why did he cite football hooligans as well? Again, socialist snobbery. Snobbery. And by the way, so we're going to get a special police squad. Who cares anyway? They probably won't do anything.
I love that they're going to use technology that's banned in that's used by Russia and China and banned in most of Europe. Somehow they're the good guys.
Facial recognition technology. I don't know if you noticed, Keir, at Southport and in all these riots, they tend to wear masks. It's ridiculous. So either they are deliberately fighting shy of the truth, or they are, even more frighteningly, genuinely delusional. They don't get it.
Do you know what? Part of me thinks it might be.
I love the comment in the chat about getting the band back together again. I certainly have more empathy now for bands that break up, because a lot of relationships are just fine at a certain level of distance, but when they become particularly close, then they become more fraught, and times change, circumstances change, so there are all sorts of very strong self-interested reasons why people drop out from participating on a live stream.
Both, you know, just because it's this government. I honestly cannot believe just how bad this has gone for them so early on. I think we can officially say the honeymoon is over. But I think after this, but I mean, I have seen some bad readings of rooms, you know, working in strategy, but this is absolutely stunning. Whoever wrote that speech should never be involved in politics ever again. That was one of the worst things a politician, I think, has ever read out. It was absolutely wrong at every single mark. It just failed to actually get to the emotion of that community and of the country. You know, what happened was beyond shocking. And he's talking about football hooligans. It was pathetic. In fact, it was insulting. It was downright insulting to the people of Southport and those families. It really was.
People are furious because, as I keep stressing this, no one's condoning these riots, you know, violent attacks on the police and all that. But people saw that, you know, and they would never react in the same way. But what those yobs were protesting about is exactly what millions of people around this country are protesting about in a far more civilized, law-abiding way. They are really worried.
So, think about how much more difficult life is becoming for 100 IQ fellow citizens, right? Think about the efforts that you may have gone through to get health insurance, or to get unemployment insurance, or to get a passport, or to get a driver's license, all the complicated hoops that you have to run through. And you likely have 120, 130 IQ, and these bureaucratic transactions just seem to get ever more difficult. All right, we need a government that makes transactions with the government and with getting a mortgage much simpler. All right, businesses take advantage of you, particularly, say, getting a mortgage, in that they lard into the mortgage agreement all sorts of complicated things that you don't understand, and then you're on the hook for them. So Elizabeth Warren is not totally wrong, right? We need an Elizabeth Warren to this type of person to make all sorts of basic transactions simpler, so that 85, 90, 95, 100 IQ members of our nation are able to navigate government and bureaucracy, and also private companies such as mortgage companies. We need the complications and the unnecessary technicalities driven out and replaced with clarity and shorter, simpler forms.
What they're worried about is that the sensible and moderate country that they grew up in is somehow being lost. And two-tier Keir, I mean, there's no doubt there are stark differences in the way the police approach, for example, that mainly ethnic riot in Leeds. Oh, sorry, you get on with it. We'll come back in about 4 hours. You smashed the town up. You know, don't worry about it.
I was speaking to some community leaders who are completely unnamed and unelected, and nobody really knows who they are. They're just resident busybodies.
Exactly, community leaders. I hate community leaders.
I'd love to be one of those.
Who are they?
Yeah, you know, it's just they all seem to have so much power again. I don't know who any of them are.
They're definitely self-appointed. And the other demonstration, protest that was not really policed very much at all was, of course, when that angry Muslim mob descended on Rochdale Police Station as a result of the beating of those cops at Manchester Airport. And by the way, I'm glad I think it's day 11 now. Day 11. and still no charges after we saw specifically on film 2 guys, we know they're brothers, beating the hell out of serving police officers, raining down punches. One of them a woman, broke her nose, blood everywhere. 3 officers had to go to hospital. No charges yet. Why? Now, let me just put this question in the air. You guys give me a call, let me know what you think and find out what Pete thinks. Is it because Manchester police are frightened that if they charge these 2 brothers, Muslims, there might be sectarian trouble?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. They are absolutely paralysed with fear. And that's just a fact. Because they know that if there ever was a full-scale riot, the police would lose. Yeah. Without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, this is the reality of it. And I have this theory in politics that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you've pandered to one side for so long, the other side is going to get really annoyed about it. And then they've got to rise up. And, yeah, I think a lot of this was very predictable. It was a matter of when and not if. Yeah. It was like, what would be the straw that breaks the camel's back? And it turns out that, you know, when sending your kids to a dance party thing becomes a kind of act of bravery in the United Kingdom, there is something wrong. That is the reality. When doing something so simple becomes a threat to your family, there is something wrong at the heart of the country.
Yeah, that's right. There's something sick in the state of Britain, and this government doesn't seem to understand it. And by the way, it's Friday night, so this is when Keir takes the night off. Hope you're not taking the night off tonight. You better not. God damn.
He gets to spend Friday night with his kids.
Seriously, we've got lots of calls coming in.
Okay, so in Judaism, there's a notion that life takes precedent over all Jewish laws, including the Sabbath, except for 3. So in this sort of situation, right, you're in government, you're in law enforcement, right, Judaism would mandate that you get out there to reduce risk to life.
What is going on in the world at present, and frankly, the big story in town is the unrest that's been taking place. Last night, it was the turn of Sunderland. And some of the footage coming out of Sunderland, well, it's upsetting, really, because, look, I'm not going to join the chorus and the Sir Keir Starmer finger-pointing and name-calling, because he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. But at the same time, the problem with this is, and those people who wreck it for everybody else, those who did join and want a sort of peaceful protest and have their voices heard, because nobody has been listening to them for decades now, decades. But when it turns into thuggery, vandalism, burning cars, burning police stations, it actually gives the opposition, it gives governments the right to then ignore us. It actually helps them say, this is nothing but thugs.
Yeah, and, you know, 2 things can be true at the same time. You know, you can have this thuggery, which none of us condemn. You know, what's the point of burning up our infrastructure when we've got no money and that's causing the problem? And we need more police and more police cars and more police stations, and here we are destroying them. That's absolutely abhorrent and ridiculous and defeating the actual issue at hand. But at the same time, it can also be true that there is a massive group of people in this country who feel completely ignored. Nobody's listening to them. And Keir Starmer did not help that with his speech in the week, where he completely ignored the issue, did not accept that there was an issue, and blamed everything on the far right. I mean, you and I are far right now, obviously, because everybody's far right.
They need to invent a new term for me. If the rest of the population is far right, I don't know where I'm at this point.
Exactly. And this is because the centre is no longer the centre.
Right. When 50% of the population is far right, are they still far right?
The centre is now far left. Yeah. So if the centre is far left, everything...
Right, and you're getting this kind of visceral conversation because these people aren't on the radio in the UK, right? They're on YouTube, they're online, and so they can say more. They can deal with more of reality. They can dispense more truth than if they had to operate under Britain's repressive press and radio laws.
Else is far right.
But the thing is, I mean, look, to me, the people spoke during Brexit. They made it very clear that they were fed up with the things that came with globalisation. They were fed up with wage compression. They were fed up with feeling like our government didn't really have any control and just wanted to delegate powers to unelected people in higher authorities. But they were also fed up with open borders. That was very clear.
Very clear.
And that was, you know, coming up to almost 6 years ago now. I mean, it's 2016, so 2024. Coming up to, I mean, it's 8 years ago, this vote's happened. And what did we see in the aftermath of that? 4 years of politicking, the political establishment trying to turn it over.
And didn't the government, this is Wilfred Riley writing on Twitter, right, as far as protecting mosques, right, Home Secretary in the United Kingdom announced emergency security for all mosques across the country. Isn't this explicitly what Britain and Canada refused to do for churches and synagogues during Black Lives Matter unrest? Right, protect them with government fighters ready to kill rioters. So the government is taking sides in these conflicts, right? They're deploying the police for partisan pro-Muslim advantage. So then the police will more likely become the target of patriots.
And then
trying to not listen.
Well, they're not listening. It already happened.
Yeah.
They were actually trying to reverse it, trying to smack down the people having had the audacity to vote for
the
that.
stupid people.
Yeah.
You know, the stupid people who
the far right, the thugs.
The far right, who didn't know what they were voting for, who were racist. That's me, because I voted to leave. You know, and they tried really, really hard to not listen, and they almost haven't listened, because we have open borders, more or less.
Well, they not only haven't listened, but if you look at current inward migration statistics, let's park the boats for now. But when it's grossing over 1 million people per year, we've got a population of 68 million. This is a huge demographic.
Right, that's insane to be taking in over 1 million people a year with a base population of 68 million.
Change. This is basically cultural vandalism. And I don't think it's far right or racist.
Just please don't call it replacement, please.
It's to say that when you have a country that you've been brought up in, when you've been part of building this progressive, tolerant society to be proud of, exactly the sort of thing that you would imagine is attracting so many people to come here. But then you don't get to share in the spoils of it. Instead, you watch it changing radically before your very eyes.
Disintegrating. Let's face it, all services have disintegrated. Doesn't matter where you look. If you look at the railways, if you look at GPs, if you look at A&E, if you look at the public sector, the roads, education, nothing is working.
Right, and where are these sort of conflagrations taking place? I'll tell you where. They're taking place in communities that are on the sharp end of this. People who, it's all very well for the middle-class, middle-aged white women, usually, moaning about everyone being racist and awful and far-right. They live in the leafy villages. They don't have an issue with men following them down the streets, harassing them. They don't have an issue with losing their jobs to a load of people who've come in from different countries.
Well, they also quite enjoy their cleaners who are working at minimum wage or less. You know, they're builders who are undercutting tradesmen who have trained and lived here for their lives. You know, they enjoy all of those perks without having any of the downside.
Their high street is probably the local post office, the village shop, some yummy mummy cafe, a Gales bakery with a Lib Dem MP.
Who no longer take cash, by the way. Do not use Gales. They no longer take cash.
Gales, to me, are the embodiment of pure evil. But apparently the person who set up Gales is a Brexiteer, so perhaps not. But the problem is they are so detached from the world in which the vast majority of people live. And because they live in their little echo chamber, in their dinner parties, and they go to their work and they sit at a desk next to some wonderful people from all around the world who have come here with Western values and a great education, they think that this is reality for everybody and have no idea that they're basically in the top privileged 5% of the country and everybody else is on the sharp end of this.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, you only need to look around the country to see that what happens when multiculturalism fails, which it has in this country now, is you just get collections of ghettos, silos. You know, we've seen it in London. We had, ages before these poor little babies were murdered in Southport, we saw in London in Whitechapel riots where cars were being overturned and fires were being started. Not riots by far-right thugs, riots by the local Muslim population in sympathy with people in Bangladesh.
Right, exactly. Something happened in Bangladesh and the Bangladeshi community came out, took to the streets and created hullabaloo. And you know what? I put the blame at this all the way back at the beginning of these pro-Palestine marches because that was OK. We mustn't condemn them. This is all fine. No one should be arrested. This is just people's natural right to protest. Well, do you know what? People have watched this taking place weekend after weekend after weekend. They've seen people wearing those keffiyeh scarves. They've seen people carrying banners with Arabic writing on. They've heard people shouting intifada. They've had people shouting from the river to the sea. They've seen this on the streets of the United Kingdom and thought, I don't recognise that. And I don't understand, frankly, what I have to do with the foreign policy decision of a country in the Middle East of which the UK has no say, is taking no part. And of course all these people are gobbling up misinformation online, Iranian-backed propaganda, suggesting that tens of thousands are being killed, suggesting that we're selling weapons to Israel. All of this nonsense that these people on these marches are using to justify going out on these marches, doing the bidding of a hostile regime that frankly wants to undo us and our communities.
But they didn't go out and march when Assad was killing 100,000 of his own women, children and men, did they?
No.
They didn't go out and protest when 2 million Muslims were in concentration camps.
They're not going out right now for Ukraine.
No.
They're not going out right now for what's going on in Somalia and Sudan.
There are concentration camps in China with Muslim people in it. You know, they're not doing it. It's just because it's Israel.
But well, it's basically because this is spoon-fed.
Right, if it's done by white people, then they react in outrage.
By bot farms in Iran, popped up with bot farms in China, in Russia. We're all...
All right, this is Amanda Alexander. She explained it in this 2023 essay talking about Revolutionary War and the West. So there were traditionally rules of war, but they are for soldiers who fight in uniform, right? Islamic terrorists do not fight in uniform. Hamas does not fight in a uniform. Hezbollah does not fight in a uniform. Therefore, if your entity does not accede to the Geneva Conventions, then you don't get any rights by the traditional theory of war. But now the overwhelming number of nations in the United Nations support this Leninist theory that anything you do against quote-unquote imperialism, simply meaning the superior power of first world European-based countries, right? Anything you do against that is licit, and anything that the European-based countries do in response to your acts of terror must be severely constrained. Right? This is the new legal framework for international humanitarian law. If you're into human rights, if you're into the laws of war, right? You now have the Viet Cong narrative has been successfully adopted by Palestinians and other Islamic terrorists who feel zero compunctions with regard to human rights. They have no moral obligations, yet the overwhelming number of nations, states in the world sides with them, that they have no obligations in how they fight back against European, quote-unquote, imperialism, while any nation that wants to defend itself, such as Israel, must be severely hampered in how they try to defend themselves and how they try to protect themselves against this Islamic terrorism.
Being played. You know, the Chinese are very good at controlling their own people when it comes to social media. It barely exists. They're also very good at controlling us with social media.
Absolutely.
And that is a huge part of what's going on right now. And I suggest it's high time government started talking about this sensibly and properly.
Okay, that will do it for now.